The dust didn't move like dust in the summer heat. It hung in the air, suspended by the sheer weight of the afternoon. And Naya ran through it with her lungs burning and her feet barely remembering the earth beneath them. She had been running for 2 hours, maybe 3, maybe longer than she could still measure. Her father had taught her once that time stops meaning the same thing when your body is the only clock you have left. And by that measure, she had run past every mile she had left to give. The cut on her jaw had stopped bleeding an hour ago, crusted dark against her skin, and the blood at her hairline had dried into something that felt like cracked mud against her temple. She didn't know whose horse had gone down first, hers or Kisto's. She didn't know if Kisto had made it. She didn't know anything except that there was a fence line ahead and a man beside it, and the men behind her were still coming, and if she stopped running now, she would never start again. Before we go any further into Naya's story, I want to ask you something from the bottom of my heart. If you believe a child should never be thrown away, if you believe a stranger deserves a chance, if you know what it costs to stand between someone and the darkness coming for them, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop your city in the comments. Let me see how far this reaches, because what I'm about to tell you is about a man who had buried enough people he couldn't save, and who decided, standing there in the dirt with a pair of wire cutters in his hand, that he wasn't going to bury one more. Caleb Dunore had not spoken to another living soul in 11 days. That was how he preferred it. 40 acres of land that still had a clean well, a horse named Copper, and a conscience that had mostly learned to leave him alone at night. He did not need neighbors. He did not need conversation. He did not need anything from the town of Redstone. And Redstone had made it abundantly clear over 3 years that it felt precisely the same way about him. He was cutting fence wire on the north boundary when she came out of the brush. She was young, maybe 19, maybe younger, and she was running the way people run when they have been running for a long time and their body has already decided to quit, but their mind refuses to hear it. Her arms weren't pumping. Her feet barely cleared the ground. She was moving forward on will alone, and that will was almost gone. She saw him. She did not slow down. She ran straight toward him, and that told him everything he needed to know. Whatever was behind her was worse than a strange man with a wire cutter. "Please," she said. That single word. Then her legs went out from under her, and Caleb caught her before she hit the ground. He looked up. 8 riders came over his ridge. They rode in a line, which was not how you rode when you were searching. It was how you rode when you already knew exactly where your target was. The man at the front wore a gray duster despite the summer heat and carried a rifle across his saddle like it was a part of his arm. Caleb set the girl on her feet. She grabbed his forearm with both hands and stayed upright that way, her breathing hard against his shoulder. "Step back from her," the man in gray called out. Caleb didn't step anywhere. "Step back from her, old man. That woman is a thief and a trespasser, and she's coming with us under lawful authority." Caleb looked at the man. Then he looked at the girl. Up close, he could see the cut along her jaw, the dried blood at her hairline, and the particular look in a person's eyes when they've been running scared for more than just a few hours. "She's on my land," Caleb said. "She was on your land," the man said. "Now she's in lawful custody. I don't see a badge." "You don't need to see a badge. I have a warrant from the territorial court." "Show it." The man reached inside his duster and held up a folded paper. He didn't bring it any closer. Caleb had been around long enough to know that a paper waved from 30 yards wasn't meant to be read. It was meant to look official enough to make a man stop asking questions. "Bring it here," Caleb said. Something shifted in the man's face. He was used to paper being enough. "Sir, I am asking you one final time." "And I'm asking you one final time," Caleb said. "Bring it here." The man in gray looked left and right at his riders. Then he nudged his horse forward and held the document out at arm's length. Caleb took it. He unfolded it deliberately, the way a man unfolds something when he wants the other person to understand he is going to read every single word. It was a warrant. All right. Territorial court, signed by a judge named Hollis, a name Caleb had never heard in his life, charging one NIA of the San Carlos Apache reservation with theft of territorial property and assault on a government surveyor. He read it twice. Then he folded it back up and held it out to the man. "This is a territorial court warrant," he said. "This isn't territorial land. This is my land. Deeded and registered in Pima County, 1881. Your paper doesn't reach here. The warrant authorizes arrest on territorial land. She is standing on my land. You want her? Come back with a county warrant, or come back with the county sheriff." He held the paper out until the man took it. "Either way, not today." The silence after that had weight to it, like a held breath. The girl Nia was still holding his arm. Her grip had eased slightly, like she hadn't expected this, like she hadn't expected anyone in the world to say that. The man in gray leaned forward in his saddle. His voice dropped just enough to sound like something more than a warning. "You are making a significant mistake," he said. "Probably," Caleb said. "I make them regularly. She's still not going with you today." The riders held position on his ridge for nearly an hour after that. He could hear them moving, hear the low sound of voices conferring. He took the girl inside his house and put her at the kitchen table, and brought water and a clean cloth for the cut on her jaw. She watched him work the way a person watches something they don't fully trust yet, not with fear, but with complete measuring attention. "You don't have to do that," she said. "You're bleeding on my floor. I can go." "They're still up on that ridge." He sat across from her. "Tell me what they actually want." She was quiet. "I ran." "I can see that. I'm asking why." Another pause. She looked at her hands flat on the table. Then she said, "My father's land, the reservation boundary. They moved the survey markers." Caleb said nothing. He kept his face still and let her talk. "They moved them 12 miles west. That puts our winter grazing land inside the territorial grant, inside the land they're giving to the rail company." My father went to the county office. They told him the surveys were already filed, already completed, that the land had never been ours to begin with. Her jaw tightened. 6 weeks ago. And this surveyor they say I assaulted. He was resetting a marker. I picked up a rock. I didn't throw it. I held it. He fell over his own boots running away. Something in Caleb's face shifted just slightly. Not a smile. Close to one. "What did you take?" he asked. She looked at him. "What makes you think I took something?" "Because you're not at the reservation. You're not at the county office. You're out here, running. And those men want you badly enough to ride 8 of them to my fence line on a summer morning. That's not for a rock you didn't throw." He met her eyes. "You've got something they want back." She reached into her dress and pulled out a folded piece of oilcloth, wrapped tight and bound with cord. She set it on the table between them. "Survey notes," she said. "The original ones from the Federal Survey of 1873. My father kept them all these years. Commissioner Shaw's men came to take them last month, but my father had already made copies and hidden the originals." She pressed her hand flat on the oilcloth. "This is what those men on your ridge are here for." "Who is Commissioner Shaw?" "Aldrich Shaw, Territorial Land Commissioner." She said the name the way people say names they have rehearsed in their heads for a long time. Flat, exact, stripped of anything but fact. He is the man who moved the markers. He is the man who filed the false surveys. He works for the rail company, but he does it through the commissioner's office, so it looks legal. So it looks like the government itself is saying the land was never ours. Caleb looked at the oilcloth, then at her. "How old are you?" he said. 19. "You rode out here alone with that." "They killed my horse 3 miles back. I ran the rest of the way." He stood up and checked the window. Silhouettes still on the ridge against the white summer sky. "You can't stay here," he said. "They'll be back with proper paperwork, or they'll come back without any paperwork at all and sort the explanation out afterward." "I know. Where were you going?" "Tucson. There is a land rights attorney there, a man named Ezra Garrett. My father wrote to him. He said he would look at the original documents." She paused. "I don't know if he is still willing. It has been 3 weeks since my father died." The room went quiet. "I'm sorry," Caleb said. "They said it was a riding accident," she said, "on flat ground, with no horse found anywhere near him." She did not look away from him. "Don't be sorry. Help me get to Tucson." It wasn't a plea. It wasn't a question. It was a plain statement of what she needed, offered without apology and without expectation. Caleb respected that considerably more than tears would have gotten her. "I'll think on it," he said. "Don't think too long," she said. "They'll be back before morning." She was right. He had her sleep in the back room with the oilcloth, his spare pistol, and one instruction. Don't open that door unless you hear 3 slow knocks followed by 2 fast ones. He sat at the kitchen table in the dark with his rifle across his knees and his back to the wall. They came at 2 in the morning, not 8, 3, moving quiet. He heard the board on the front porch creak, the one he'd never gotten around to fixing in 2 years, and he was already at the window when the first man put his hand on the door latch. "I'd move that hand," Caleb said through the window glass. The man froze solid. "I've got a Winchester aimed at this door. Wood doesn't slow a rifle bullet much. You can test that if you want to, or you can get back on your horse. One of those options ends the night better for you than the other." A long pause. Boots on porch boards moving away. Then hoofbeats fading into the dark. He stayed at the window until there was nothing left to hear. Then he went to the back room door. 3 slow, 2 fast. Naya opened it. She was fully dressed. The oilcloth was tucked back inside her dress. The spare pistol was in her hand with the hammer already back. "How many?" she said. 3. They'll report to the others." "Yes, they will. We need to leave before dawn." "I know." "So you've thought on it," she said. He looked at her standing there in the dark with a pistol she clearly knew how to hold, in a stranger's house, with her father 3 weeks dead and 8 men willing to kill her for a piece of oilcloth and whatever truth was folded inside it. "Get your boots on," he said. They left at 4 in the morning. Nia riding Copper, and Caleb on his work mule, Agnes, who had strong opinions about being saddled before sunrise and expressed each one of them in full. Nia, despite everything she was carrying, almost smiled at it. "Agnes," she said, "that is some name for a horse." "She came with it." "Did you name Copper yourself?" "I did." "Why Copper?" "His color." She looked at the horse critically. "It's more of a brown." "It's copper brown." "That is just brown." He didn't respond, but something loosened in him, the way a rope loses tension when you stop pulling against it. She had a way of asking questions without them feeling like an interrogation. She was curious and direct, and she didn't wait for anyone's permission to be either one. They rode 2 hours through the dark before he asked the question that had been sitting with him since she'd said the name Aldrich Shaw. "How big is this?" he said. "The land commission, the rail company. How much territory?" She was quiet a moment. "My father's documents show falsified surveys on 7 separate land parcels. All Apache, all within the projected route of the Southern Arizona Rail Extension." She paused. 14,000 acres. Caleb sat with that number. "That's not just your father's land." "No, that's every Apache family in the San Carlos corridor. And Shaw filed all of it through his office." "Shaw signed all of it." "He doesn't file anything himself. He has men for that. He stays clean." She said that last part with a particular flatness. "He goes to church on Sunday. He is a very respected man in Tucson." Caleb thought about that for a long while as they rode. How a man could move 14,000 acres of other people's lives around on paper and still sit in a church pew looking like an upstanding member of the community. He thought about the judge's name on that warrant. He thought about the riders, hired men doing hired work, carrying legal-looking paper that almost but didn't quite mean what it appeared to say. He thought about his own deed. Registered Pima County, 1881. How solid that had felt when he put his name to it. "Your father," he said, "did he have copies of the documents anywhere besides what you're carrying?" "He sent one set to my uncle on the reservation." "Do they know about him?" "Yes." "Is he safe?" A pause longer than the others. "I don't know," she said quietly. "I left before I could find out." They stopped before full light to water the horses at a creek crossing Caleb knew. While the animals drank, he crouched at the bank and listened. The desert in summer had its own sound, dry and layered, and he had learned years ago that wrong sounds in it carried a long way. "You said Garrett took a similar case 3 years ago. He won it, survey fraud on Tohono O'odham land. He got the original federal documents and proved the county filings didn't match the federal record. The family kept their land. She crouched beside him. He'll know what these mean. He'll know exactly what to do with them. And if he won't take it? Then I go to the federal land office directly. Shaw will have people watching that. I know. They'll move on me the moment I walk in. I know that too. She looked at him steadily. Are you trying to talk me out of going? No, he said. I'm trying to understand what we're walking into. She looked at him for a moment. Something moved in her expression. Not quite trust, but something at its outer edge. My father used to say that knowing the full size of a problem doesn't make it smaller, she said. It just makes you honest about what it costs. Caleb stood up. He sounds like he was a smart man. He was the smartest man I ever knew, she said. No performance around it, just fact. They kept moving. They were 2 hours from the Redstone-Tucson road when Caleb pulled Agnes to a stop and held up his hand. Nia stopped Copper without being told, and they both went still together. The way people go still when stillness is the only thing between them and something bad. 5 riders moving south on a parallel track. Close enough to hear the creak of saddle leather on the quiet summer air. They got ahead of us, Caleb said quietly. They know the roads, she said. They expected I'd go cross-country. They'll have the roads covered in both directions. How many ways do you think Shaw authorized? Enough, she said simply. He thought for a moment. There's an old trade route goes through the canyon country south of here. Comes out above Tucson. Takes longer but stays off every road. She looked at him. You know the old routes? My wife knew them, he said. She used to ride them in summer. He stopped. Before. He didn't explain what before meant. She didn't ask him to. Can you find it from here? She said. I can find it. She nodded once, and that was all the conversation either of them needed on the matter. They turned west and let the riders move past unseen. When the sound faded completely, they pushed on. The sun was full up, and the heat came down like something deliberate and personal. Caleb's shirt was soaked through by mid-morning. He had given her his hat before they left the ranch. She had tried to return it twice. He had refused twice. The third time she tried, he said, "You keep arguing about the hat, and we'll be standing here when they come back." She put it on and stopped arguing. Around midday, resting in the shade of a canyon wall with the horses breathing beside them, she asked him something she had been holding since before dawn. "Why did you stop them?" she said. "Yesterday, the first time. Why did you put yourself between 8 armed men and someone you had never met?" He took his time with it. They didn't have the right paper. That is not a reason to step in front of 8 rifles. Maybe not. So what is? He looked out at the canyon, the red rock, the heat shimmer over the flats below. "I've let things go before," he said. "When I told myself it wasn't my problem. When I told myself there was nothing I could do that would matter." He went quiet for a moment. "I've buried people I could have helped. I don't want any more of those." The silence after that was the kind that isn't empty, the kind that's full of something real. "My father died because no one helped him," she said. "Not because no one could, but because no one did." "I know," Caleb said. "So you understand why I intend to finish this whether you ride with me or not." "I understand that just fine," he said. He stood. He checked the horses. He looked south at the canyon road that would take them where they needed to go. "Let's move," he said. "We've got a long stretch before dark." They rode in the canyon's deep shadow, where the summer heat couldn't fully reach them. Nia kept one hand over the oilcloth inside her dress and rode with the other. Caleb rode beside her and said very little, and she didn't need him to. But once, late in the afternoon when the canyon walls opened wide and the whole of the Southern Territory lay ahead of them, red and gold and impossibly vast under the white summer sky, she said something in the same way she said everything, quietly, and meaning every word of it. "They think we are easy to take from," she said, "because we have been taken from before." Caleb looked at the land spread out ahead. "They're wrong," he said, and they rode on into it. The morning came slow over the reservation, the way mornings come when the night before has been heavy with things finally setting down. Caleb woke before full light, the way he always did, and found Nia already outside, sitting on a flat rock at the edge of the settlement, looking east at the sky going from gray to pink. She had the letter from her father in her hands, not reading it, just holding it. He sat down a few feet away and gave her the space she needed. After a while, she said, "Brother Thomas is checking on my uncle. He said the wound is healing clean, but he needs more time." "That's good." "Kisto is already arguing with him about when he can ride again." "That's also good." She almost smiled. "You sleep?" "Some." "Liar." He didn't deny it. They sat in silence as the light grew. From the houses behind them came the sounds of a settlement waking. A woman's voice calling a child, the ring of iron on iron from somewhere near the forge, the low murmur of men talking near the corral. Ordinary sounds. The kind of sounds that meant life was still moving forward. A rider came up the path from the south just as the sun cleared the horizon. Not a reservation horse. A federal horse with a brand Caleb recognized from the courthouse. The rider was Crane's deputy, a young man with a dust-covered coat and the look of someone who had been riding since before dawn. He reined in and looked at Caleb. "Mr. Dunore?" "That's right." "Crane sent me. He needs you and Miss Nia in Tucson by midday. Shaw's attorney filed a motion to have the stay reconsidered. They're arguing the federal investigation lacks jurisdiction over territorial land matters." Caleb stood up. "The stay was granted by a federal judge." "Yes, sir. But Shaw's people are claiming we're overstepped because the original documents were entered as evidence in a territorial murder case that hasn't been formally closed. They're trying to create a procedural tangle that buys Shaw time while his Washington contacts push for an expedited rail grant hearing." Nia folded her father's letter and put it away. "How long do we have?" "The hearing is set for 10 o'clock. Crane wants you both there to testify in person. He says the documents speak, but you speak louder." Caleb looked at Nia. She was already standing, already reaching for Copper's reins where they hung over the corral rail. 10 o'clock gives us 3 hours, she said. "We can make it if we push." "We'll push," Caleb said. They left word with Sia and Brother Thomas, and they rode out of the reservation with the sun at their backs and the dust rising behind them. The road to Tucson was different now. No riders tracking them. No warrants waiting at the next crossing. Just open ground and the press of time. They made it in 2 hours and 40 minutes, coming into Tucson from the east through the backways. Caleb was learning to read the way a man reads a map he's been forced to study. Crane met them at the side door of the federal building, looking like a man who had been up all night and intended to stay up considerably longer. "Good," he said when he saw them. "You're here. Weir's already in chambers. Shaw's attorney is a man named Corrigan. He's sharp, he's well-connected, and he's arguing that the entire federal intervention is premised on documents that were obtained illegally." "Obtained how?" Nia said. "He's claiming your father stole them from the Territorial Land Office before his death, that they were never properly in your possession and therefore cannot be entered as federal evidence." Nia's face went still. "My father kept those documents in his home for 11 years. They were his. He had every right to them." "That's what we'll argue," Crane said. "But Corrigan has a witness. A clerk from the Territorial Land Office who is prepared to testify that your father removed the documents without authorization 3 weeks before he died." 3 weeks before he died, my father could barely walk, Nia said. "He had been sick. He hadn't left the reservation in over a month." "Then we need to prove that," Crane said. "And we need to prove it before Weir rules on the motion." They went inside. The chambers were the same as the day before, but the atmosphere had changed. The air was tighter. Shaw sat at a table with his attorney, a thin man with wire spectacles and the precise movements of someone who counted every word before he spent it. Shaw himself looked composed, a man who had been arrested the day before and released on bail by a territorial judge who had no authority over federal charges, but who had enough local standing to make the release stick until the jurisdictional question was settled. Judge Weir sat behind his desk with the same unreadable expression he had worn through every moment of the previous day's proceedings. He nodded at Crane, at Nia, at Caleb. "Let's proceed," he said. Corrigan rose. "Your Honor, the federal government's case rests on documents that were removed from the Territorial Land Office by a man who had no legal right to them. The late Mr. Nia's father was a private citizen, not a government employee. He had no authority to take official records from a government office, regardless of his reasons. Those documents are therefore fruit of an illegal seizure and should be excluded from these proceedings. Crane stood. Your Honor, the documents were not seized. They were copies of federal survey records that Mr. Nia's father obtained through his own efforts. The Territorial Land Office had no claim to them because they were never filed with that office. They were kept in his private residence for over a decade. The witness Mr. Corrigan intends to call cannot testify to a theft that never happened. Weir looked at Corrigan. Your witness is here? In the hallway, Your Honor. Bring him in. The clerk who entered was a man in his 50s with nervous hands and the kind of face that had spent years learning to agree with whoever held authority in the room. He was sworn in and asked to describe what he had seen. He swallowed. I was working late. I saw Mr. Nia's father come into the records room. He took a file from the shelf. I didn't think anything of it at the time. He was known to the office, but later, when the file was missing, I remembered. You're certain it was him? Corrigan said. Yes, sir, I saw his face. Crane stood up. What time of day was this? Evening, near sundown. And what was Mr. Nia's father doing when he entered the office? The clerk hesitated. Walking. Walking. Not using a cane, not limping. I don't recall. Let me help you recall. Crane picked up a document from his table. I have here a statement from Dr. Elias Barlow of the San Carlos Agency. He treated Mr. Nia's father for a severe infection in his left leg during the month before his death. The infection made walking difficult. Dr. Barlow's notes state that the patient could not bear weight on that leg without assistance for a period of 6 weeks. Crane looked at the clerk. Are you telling this court that you saw a man with a debilitating leg infection walk into a government office, remove a file from a shelf without assistance, and walk out again, all without a cane and without a limp? The clerk's face reddened. I might have been mistaken about the date. Or about the man? I know what I saw. You saw someone. But was it Mr. Nia's father? Or was it someone who resembled him? Someone who had reason to want those documents to appear stolen? Corrigan objected. Weir overruled. The clerk's hands were shaking now. I was told to say it was him. The room went quiet. By whom? Crane said. The clerk looked at Shaw. Shaw looked back with an expression that held no warmth. By a man who said he worked for the Land Commission, the clerk whispered. He said if I didn't testify, I'd lose my position. He said they'd find someone who would. Weir's voice cut through the silence. Who was that man? I don't know his name. He came to my house. He knew where I lived. He knew about my daughter's illness. He said he could help with the medical bills if I cooperated. Caleb watched Shaw's face. Not a flicker. The man was carved from something that didn't feel shame. Weir dismissed the clerk. He looked at Corrigan. Do you have any further evidence to present? Corrigan sat down. No, Your Honor. Weir leaned back. The motion to exclude the documents is denied. The stay remains in effect. The federal investigation proceeds. He looked at Crane. I want the full list of named individuals in the conspiracy on my desk within 72 hours. And I want to know who sent that man to pressure a government clerk. Crane nodded. You'll have it, Your Honor. They left the chambers. In the hallway, Shaw walked past them without a word. His attorney followed, not meeting anyone's eyes. Crane watched them go. That clerk's testimony will be enough to open a witness intimidation charge, he said. But it won't be easy. Shaw has reach. He has reach because people are afraid of him, Nia said. My father was afraid of him. My uncle was afraid of him. But my father gave me the documents anyway. Crane looked at her. That took courage. It took preparation, she said. He knew what was coming. He made sure I was ready. Caleb stood beside her. What's next? We build the federal case. We have Shaw, we have Hollis, we have the railroad's legal representative. But there's a name in that letter from Nia's uncle that we haven't fully pursued yet. The deputy federal assessor in Washington. That man is the key. He's the one who approved the falsified surveys at the federal level. Without his signature, the railroad grant couldn't have moved forward. Can you reach him? Caleb said. I have a contact in the commissioner's office, but if I send word through official channels, Shaw's allies will know. We need someone who can deliver a message quietly, someone who knows the territory and doesn't leave tracks. Caleb looked at Nia. She looked back at him. Neither of them spoke, but the thought passed between them the way thoughts pass between people who have learned to read each other's silences. "I'll go," Caleb said. Crane studied him. "You understand what that means? Washington is 3 weeks hard travel each way, and once you're there, you'll be operating without a badge, without backup, in a city where Shaw's money has already bought influence." "I understand. You could lose your land while you're gone. The deed restoration isn't final." "I know." Nia said, "I'll go with him." Caleb shook his head. "You're needed here. The federal case needs your testimony. The reservation needs you. Your uncle needs you." "My uncle needs to know that the man who killed his brother is going to face justice," she said. "That happens in Washington as much as it happens here." Crane held up a hand. "Let me think." He paced the corridor for a moment. "If I send you both, it raises questions. 2 people vanishing from Tucson right after Shaw's arrest. His people will notice. But if you leave separately, if you take different routes and meet in Washington, it buys us time." "Separate routes," Caleb said. "I can go through the Northern Territory, cross into Colorado, then east. She can go through the southern route, through New Mexico, then north. We'll meet in Washington." "That adds weeks," Nia said. "It adds safety," Caleb said. "If one of us gets stopped, the other still makes it." She looked at him. He saw the argument forming in her eyes, the same stubbornness that had carried her through 8 riders and a murder warrant and a federal courthouse. But she didn't voice it. She nodded instead. "When do we leave?" she said. Crane looked at his watch. "Tomorrow morning. I'll have papers drawn up for both of you, federal courier credentials. They won't hold up to close scrutiny, but they'll get you past most checkpoints." He paused. "One more thing. Shaw's men will be watching the road out of Tucson. Both roads. You'll need to leave at night, separately, and you won't be able to take the main routes." "I know the northern route," Caleb said. "I know the southern," Nia said. "Then we're settled." Crane looked at them both. "I'll have the documents ready by midnight. Pick them up at the federal building. Don't tell anyone where you're going, not even Garrett." They left the courthouse and stood on the steps in the midday heat. Tucson moved around them, indifferent to the weight of what had just been decided. 3 weeks, Nia said. "That's a long time." "It is. Longer than I've been away from the reservation since I was a child." "You've been away from it for 2 weeks already." "That was different. I was running. This is walking." Caleb looked at her. "You don't have to do this. Crane can find someone else. He won't find someone who can read the documents the way I can. He won't find someone who knows what they mean." She looked at him. "And he won't find someone who trusts you to meet them on the other side." Caleb said nothing. There was nothing to say that the moment didn't already hold. They parted at the edge of town. Nia went to the reservation to spend the last hours with her uncle in Kisto. Caleb found a room at a boarding house near the livery, paid for 2 nights he didn't intend to use, and spent the afternoon writing a letter to a man in Redstone who owed him a favor. The letter was simple. "If anyone comes to the ranch, make sure they know the deed is under federal protection." He didn't know if it would matter. He wrote it anyway. That night he picked up the courier credentials from Crane and stood in the alley behind the federal building, looking at the stars. The same stars he had seen from the reservation 2 nights before. They looked different now, closer somehow. Or maybe he was the one who had shifted. He left Tucson at 2 in the morning, riding Agnes because she was steady and sure-footed, and because Copper belonged to Nia. He took the northern road, the one that climbed into the hills and then dropped into the high desert beyond. The air was cold and clean, and the only sound was the creak of saddle leather and the steady rhythm of hooves on packed earth. He did not look back. The first day passed in a blur of miles and silence. He stopped only to water the horse and to eat a cold meal from his saddlebag. He saw no one. The second day he crossed into territory he had not seen in 15 years, a stretch of canyon country that he and his wife had ridden once, in the first year of their marriage, when the world had seemed wide and full of possibility. He remembered her pointing out the shape of a rock formation that looked like a sleeping horse, and how she had laughed when he said it looked more like a saddle. The memory came back unbidden, sharp and clear, and he let it sit with him for a while before setting it aside. On the third day, he found the body. It was a man, maybe 50, lying face down in a dry wash with a bullet hole in his back. His horse stood nearby, head down, waiting. Caleb dismounted and turned the body over. He didn't recognize the face, but he recognized the clothes. The man was wearing a coat with a patch that read, U.S. Government Surveyor. He searched the man's pockets. Empty. Whoever had done this had taken everything. But in the lining of the coat, sewn into the seam, Caleb found a piece of paper folded tight. He opened it. It was a list of names, written in a cramped hand. Shaw's name was on it. Hollis's name was on it. And at the bottom, a name he didn't know. Emmett Coulter, Deputy Federal Assessor, Washington, D.C. Someone else had been carrying the same truth he was carrying, and someone had caught up to them. Caleb buried the man in the wash, covering the grave with rocks to keep the animals away. He said nothing over the grave, because there were no words that would help. Then he mounted Agnes and pushed on, riding harder than before. He was 3 days into a 3-week journey, and the road ahead had just become a great deal more dangerous. On the 6th night, he made camp in a hollow between 2 ridges, where a small fire would be hidden from the road. He was eating a cold biscuit when he heard the horse. Not Agnes. Agnes was standing quietly, ears forward, watching the darkness to the south. Another horse, coming slow. Caleb put out the fire with his boot and moved into the shadow of a boulder. He waited. The horse came into view. A figure sat in the saddle, slumped with exhaustion. And then the figure looked up, and the moonlight caught her face. Nia. He stepped out of the shadows. Nia. She slid off the horse before it stopped moving. Her legs buckled, and he caught her the same way he had caught her on his ridge 11 days before. "You're supposed to be on the southern route," he said. "Took a detour." Her voice was raw. Shaw's men ambushed the stage road 2 days east of Tucson. They were waiting for someone with federal papers. They must have known about the courier credentials. "How did you get away?" "I didn't go through the ambush. I saw the bodies from a ridge and turned north. I've been riding ever since." She looked at him. "They killed 4 people, a family. They were just traveling." Caleb helped her sit down by the remains of the fire. He built it back up, small and low, and put water on to heat. She drank 3 cups before she stopped shaking. "They're looking for us," she said. "Both of us. Shaw posted men on every road heading east." "I know. I found a surveyor 3 days ago, shot in the back. He had the same list of names I'm carrying." "Then they know we're coming. They know someone is coming. They don't know it's us. Not yet." She looked at the fire. "What do we do?" "We ride together. 2 people are harder to stop than 1. And we stay off the roads. That adds time. Time is better than dead." She didn't argue. They moved out before dawn, 2 horses, 2 riders, 1 road that was not a road but a direction. The country grew rougher as they climbed into the high mesa country, where the air was thin and the nights were cold enough to frost the saddle blankets. They spoke little, saving their breath for the miles. But the silence between them had changed. It was not the silence of strangers. It was the silence of 2 people who had learned to trust each other without needing to say it. On the 9th day, they came to a town called Silver Springs, a mining camp that had grown into something more permanent. They needed supplies, and they needed information. Caleb left Nia with the horses outside town and went in alone. The general store was run by a woman named Hattie, who had the sharp eyes of someone who had been in Silver Springs long enough to know every face that didn't belong. She looked at Caleb's dust-covered coat and his worn boots and said, "You're not a miner." "No, ma'am." "You're not a lawman either." "No, ma'am." "Then you're either running from something or running toward it." "Which is it?" "Toward." She nodded as if that confirmed something she had already suspected. "There was a man through here 2 days ago, asking about a woman and an older man traveling together. Said they were wanted for murder in Arizona territory. Offered a reward." "What did you tell him?" "I told him I hadn't seen anyone fitting that description." She looked at him steadily. "I don't much like men who offer rewards for people they've never met." "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. He's still in town, staying at the boarding house on Main Street. He's got 2 men with him." Caleb bought what he needed and left. He found Nia where he had left her, sitting on a rock with Copper's reins in her hand, watching the road. "We've got a problem," he said. He told her. She listened without interrupting. "They'll be watching the road out of town," she said. "They will. So we don't take the road." They left Silver Springs through the gully behind the livery, a dry wash that led to the open country beyond. It was slow going, the horses picking their way over loose rock, but it put them out of sight of the town. By the time Shaw's men realized they had slipped past, they were already 5 miles east and climbing into the foothills. On the 12th night, they found shelter in an abandoned line shack, its roof half collapsed, but its walls still standing. They built a fire in the hearth and sat across from each other, the flames casting long shadows on the walls. "How much further?" Naya said. "Another week, maybe 10 days, depends on the weather." "The weather is holding." "It is." She looked into the fire. "I keep thinking about my father." "What about him?" How he knew. How he planned for all of this. He must have known he wouldn't make it. He must have known what they would do to him. And he still wrote that letter. He still made sure I had everything I needed. "He trusted you." "Yes," she said it quietly. "But trust is a heavy thing to carry. It's the only thing worth carrying." She looked at him then, and something in her expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but close. "You sound like him." Then he must have been a man who said obvious things plainly. "He was." She paused. "He would have liked you." Caleb didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. They sat in the firelight until the flames died down, and then they slept, each on their own side of the hearth, with the horses standing guard outside. On the 16th day they crossed into Colorado territory. The landscape changed from high desert to grassland, the air softer, the sky wider. They stopped at a ranch belonging to a man named Orrin, a friend of a friend from Caleb's younger days. Orrin was a broad man with a gray beard and a voice like gravel. He didn't ask questions. He fed them, gave them a place to sleep, and pointed them toward the best route east. "You'll hit the railroad line at Bent's Ford," he said. "From there you can catch the stage to Denver and the train east from there." "We're not taking the stage," Caleb said. "Too many eyes." Orrin nodded. "Then you'll have to cross the river at the old ford, 2 miles north of the town. It's deeper this time of year, but your horses can manage it." They left at dawn. The river was running high, but they crossed without trouble, the water reaching Agnes's belly but no higher. They dried off on the far bank and pushed on. On the 19th day they reached the outskirts of Denver. The city was bigger than anything Caleb had seen in years, and he felt its weight pressing down on him as they rode through the outskirts. Naya looked at the buildings, at the crowded streets, and said nothing. "I don't like cities," Caleb said. "Neither do I." "Then we'll get what we need and leave." They found a boarding house near the rail yard that didn't ask for names. They bought tickets for the morning train east, paying in cash. They ate a hot meal for the first time in nearly 3 weeks, and they slept in real beds. And in the morning, they boarded the train. The journey to Washington took another 5 days. The train carried them across plains and rivers and mountains, through towns and cities that blurred together. They shared a compartment and took turns sleeping and watching. Naya spent hours reading and rereading her father's letter. Caleb spent hours looking out the window, watching the country change. On the afternoon of the 24th day, they arrived in Washington. The city was immense. Caleb had never seen so many buildings, so many people, so much movement. He stood on the platform with Nia beside him, and for a moment he felt like a man who had stepped into a world he didn't recognize. "Where do we start?" Nia said. "Find the federal assessor's office, find Emmett Coulter, and find out if he's Shaw's man or if he can be turned." They found a hotel near the Capitol and checked in under false names. That evening, Caleb walked to the federal building, a massive stone structure that seemed to have been built to remind everyone who entered it of their own smallness. He found the assessor's office on the 3rd floor, dark and locked. He stood outside the door for a long moment, reading the nameplate. Emmett Coulter, Deputy Federal Assessor. He didn't knock. He didn't know yet what he would say. He went back to the hotel where Nia was waiting. "He's not there tonight," he said. "We'll go in the morning. He'll know who we are the moment we walk in." "Probably." "Then we need to be ready for that." "I am." She looked at him. You're not afraid. I was afraid on my ridge, the day you came out of the brush. I've been afraid ever since. The difference is, I've learned to move through it." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My father used to say that courage wasn't about not being afraid. It was about doing what needed to be done, even when you were." Sounds like a wise man. He was. She paused. He also said that the right thing is rarely the easy thing, but it's always the thing you can live with afterward. Caleb looked at her. He was right. They sat in the hotel room as the night deepened, the sounds of the city drifting up from the streets below. Tomorrow, they would walk into Emmett Coulter's office and confront a man who had the power to destroy their case or to complete it. Tomorrow, they would learn whether all the miles and all the fear had been worth it. But tonight, they were together, and that was enough. The morning came gray and cold, the kind of Washington morning that seemed designed to remind you that winter was never far away. Caleb woke before dawn, dressed in his best clothes, which were still a rancher's clothes, worn and patched, and stood at the window watching the city stir to life. Nia was already awake. She sat on the edge of the bed with her father's letter in her hands, reading it one last time before she folded it and put it in the inner pocket of her coat. "Ready?" he said. "Ready." They walked to the federal building. The streets were crowded with clerks and messengers and officials, all moving with the purposeful speed of people who had places to be. Caleb and Nia moved through them like two fish swimming upstream, out of place but determined. The third floor was busy. Clerks hurried past, carrying stacks of papers. A man in a pressed suit stood outside Coulter's office, talking to a secretary. Caleb walked up to the door and knocked. A voice from inside, "Enter." He opened the door. Emmett Coulter was a thin man in his late 50s, with gray hair and the kind of face that had learned to show nothing. He looked up from his desk, his eyes moving from Caleb to Nia and back. "You're not on my appointment list." "No, sir." "Then state your business quickly. I have a meeting in 20 minutes. Caleb closed the door behind them. "My name is Caleb Dunore. This is Nia. We rode 3 weeks from Arizona Territory to talk to you about a land fraud conspiracy involving Commissioner Aldrich Shaw, Judge Hollis, and the Southern Arizona Rail Extension." Coulter's expression did not change. "I don't know what you're talking about." "With respect, sir, I think you do." Coulter set down his pen. "You're making a serious accusation." "I'm stating a fact. We have original federal survey documents. We have sworn testimony from a federal surveyor. We have a witness who can place you at a meeting with Shaw's representatives in Washington 18 months ago." Coulter's jaw tightened. "You have nothing. We have your name on a list that was carried by a man who was shot in the back 3 days out of Tucson, a list that was carried by Nia's father before he was killed, a list that is now in the hands of a federal investigator named Aldous Crane, who is building a case that will reach this office within the week." The room was silent. Coulter looked at them, and Caleb saw something move behind his eyes. Not fear, calculation. "What do you want?" Coulter said. "I want you to testify," Nia said. "I want you to tell the truth about what Shaw paid you and what he promised you in exchange for approving those falsified surveys. And if I don't, then the case goes forward without you. Your name will be on the record. You'll face charges alongside Shaw and Hollis. You'll lose your position, your pension, your reputation. You'll have nothing left." Coulter stared at her. "You're young to be making threats." "I'm not making threats. I'm describing the future." She stepped forward. "My father is dead because of what you did. A man who never hurt anyone, who only wanted to keep the land that belonged to his family, is dead because you signed a piece of paper that you knew was false. I am not here to threaten you. I am here to give you a choice." Coulter looked down at his desk. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he reached into his drawer and pulled out a folded document. "This arrived 3 days ago," he said. "A letter from Shaw, delivered by private courier. He asked me to destroy the original federal survey records for the San Carlos corridor. He said he would make it worth my while." He set the letter on the desk. "I haven't responded." Caleb picked up the letter. He read it. It was signed by Shaw, dated 2 weeks after his arrest. "Why haven't you responded?" Caleb said. "Because I knew someone would come." Coulter looked up. "I've been waiting for you." Naya looked at him. "Then you'll testify?" Coulter was quiet for a moment. "I'll testify," he said, "but I want protection. When Shaw learns what I've done, he'll send men after me the same way he sent them after your father." "You'll have federal protection," Caleb said. "Crane will arrange it. Then we have an agreement." They left the office with the letter in Caleb's pocket. They walked out of the federal building into the gray Washington morning, and Naya stopped on the steps and looked up at the sky. "He did it," she said. "Who?" "My father. He said the truth would find its way if we gave it enough time. He was right." She turned to Caleb. "It's almost over." "Almost," he said, but even as he said it, he knew it wasn't. Shaw was in custody, but his money was still moving. His allies were still in place. The railroad company had not withdrawn its claim. There would be more battles, more miles, more nights spent watching shadows. But that was for later. Right now, standing on the steps of the federal building in Washington City, with Nia beside him and a signed confession in his pocket, Caleb allowed himself to feel something he had not felt in a very long time: hope. They returned to the hotel. That evening, they sent a telegram to Crane in Tucson. "Coulter will testify. Letter from Shaw in hand. Proceeding with federal case." And then they waited. 3 days later, a reply came. "Shaw's bail revoked. Federal grand jury convenes Monday. You're both needed back." They booked the first train west. The ride felt shorter this time. The country looked different through the window, less like an obstacle and more like a homecoming. They were 10 days out from Tucson when the train stopped in the middle of the night. No station, no warning, just the jarring halt of metal on metal, and then silence. Caleb woke instantly. He looked out the window. Darkness, no lights. "What is it?" Nia said. "I don't know." He moved to the door of their compartment and opened it. The corridor was empty. The other passengers were stirring, murmuring in confusion. He stepped out and walked toward the front of the train. He found the conductor standing on the platform between cars, staring into the darkness. "What happened?" Caleb said. "There's something on the tracks. We hit it." "What was it?" "I don't know. It looked like a man." Caleb felt the cold settle into his chest. He looked out into the darkness and saw nothing. But he knew, with the certainty of a man who had spent too many years reading the land and the people on it, that they had not come this far for the road to end here. "Get everyone back inside," he said. "Lock the doors. Don't open them until daylight." The conductor looked at him. "Who are you?" "A man who has been running for a month," Caleb said, "and I'm not about to stop now." The train sat dead on the tracks, its engine hissing steam into the cold night air. Caleb stood on the platform between the passenger car and the baggage car, staring into the darkness beyond the headlamp's weak glow. The conductor had gone forward with a lantern to inspect what they had hit. The minutes stretched, and the silence pressed in from all sides. Naya appeared at Caleb's elbow. She had her coat on and her father's letter tucked inside it. "I don't like this," she said. "Neither do I." The conductor came back, walking fast, his lantern swinging. His face was pale in the light. "There's a body," he said. "A man. He was lying across the tracks. He's dead." "Anyone recognize him?" Caleb said. "No, he's not dressed like a railroad man. He's wearing civilian clothes. And there's something else." The conductor hesitated. "He had a piece of paper pinned to his coat, with your name on it." Caleb felt the cold settle deeper. "Show me." He followed the conductor forward, Naya behind him. The body lay beside the track where they had moved it. The man was maybe 40, with a weathered face and hands that had seen hard work. The paper pinned to his coat was folded once. Caleb knelt and unfolded it. In rough handwriting, "For Caleb Dunore, you should have stayed home." He stood up. "We need to get off this train." "Now?" the conductor said. "Now. They knew we were on this train. They put a body on the tracks to stop us. That means they're close." The conductor looked at the darkness beyond the lantern. "There's nothing out there for miles. No town, no station. There are men out there," Caleb said. "And they're not here to offer us a ride." He turned and walked back to the passenger car, Naya following. "Gather what we have," he said. "We're leaving." They moved quickly. The other passengers watched with wide eyes, murmuring among themselves. Caleb and Naya grabbed their saddlebags and the small bundle of documents they had brought from Washington. They slipped out the rear door of the last car and dropped onto the gravel beside the track. The night was cold and moonless. The stars were out, but they offered only faint light. Caleb listened. Nothing but the wind and the distant cry of a night bird. "This way," he said, and led them away from the tracks into the open country. They walked for an hour, maybe more, stumbling over uneven ground, their eyes adjusting slowly to the dark. Naya moved beside him, silent and steady. They did not speak. There was nothing to say that the situation did not already make plain. Ahead, a light flickered. A farmhouse set back from a dirt road. Caleb altered course toward it. They approached carefully, circling wide to make sure there were no horses tied outside, no signs of waiting men. The house was quiet. A single lamp burned in a window. Caleb knocked. After a long moment, the door cracked open. An old man peered out, a shotgun in his hands. "We need horses," Caleb said. "We'll pay." The old man looked at them, at their dusty clothes and tired faces. "You the ones they're after?" "Probably." The old man considered this. Then he opened the door wider. "I got 2 horses in the barn. They're not young, but they'll carry you. $50 each." Caleb counted out the money. The old man took it and led them to the barn. The horses were sturdy, if not fast. Caleb saddled them while Naya filled canteens from the pump. "You heading east or west?" the old man said. "West." "Then you'll want to avoid the main road for the next 20 miles. There's a patrol out tonight. I saw them ride past at sundown." "How many?" 6, maybe 8. Hard to count in the dark." Caleb finished cinching the saddle. "Thank you." The old man shrugged. "I didn't see anything." They rode out of the farmyard and into the night, heading west across open pasture. The horses were sure-footed but slow, and Caleb felt the miles stretching out ahead of them like a long, uncertain thread. They had lost the train. They had lost the safety of numbers. They were alone now, in a country they did not know, with men hunting them who had already shown they would kill to stop them. Dawn found them in a shallow valley, where a creek ran thin and clear. They stopped to water the horses and to rest. Nia sat on a rock and pulled out her father's letter. She read it again, slowly. "He said to trust the road," she said quietly, "that the road would take me where I needed to go." "Has it?" She looked up. "It brought me to you." Caleb met her eyes. "And it's going to take us home." She folded the letter and put it away. "What do we do now?" "We keep moving. We find another train, or we find someone who can get a message to Crane. We get back to Tucson before Shaw's people can regroup. And if we can't, we will." They rode on. The country grew rougher as the day wore on, the valleys giving way to hills covered in scrub oak and juniper. The sun climbed high and hot, then began its slow descent toward the western horizon. They saw no one. The road was empty, the land silent. Around midday they came to a small settlement, a handful of buildings clustered around a crossroads. A general store, a blacksmith, a saloon. Caleb left Naya with the horses at the edge of town and walked in alone. The general store was cool and dim. A woman behind the counter looked up as he entered. "Afternoon," she said. "Afternoon. I need to send a telegram." The woman shook her head. "Line's down. Been down since yesterday. Something about a storm up north." Caleb felt the weight settle back onto his shoulders. "Is there a telegraph office in the next town?" 20 miles east. But I heard the line is down there too." "Convenient." The woman looked at him. "Mister, I don't know who you are or what you're running from, but I've seen men come through here before with that look in their eye. The ones who make it keep moving." He nodded. "Obliged." He bought supplies, dried meat, bread, a bag of coffee, and walked back to where Naya waited. He told her about the telegraph lines. "Someone cut them," she said. "Yes." "They're isolating us." "Yes." She looked at the horizon. "Then we don't need a telegraph. We just need to get to Tucson. That's 200 miles. We've come further." He looked at her. She was right. They had come further, and they would go further still. They pushed on through the afternoon. The land flattened into prairie, the grass tall and yellow in the late light. They made camp that night in a stand of cottonwoods near a dry creek bed. Caleb built a small fire, and they ate in silence, the weight of the miles pressing down on them. Naya spoke first. "I keep thinking about my uncle. He's safe. Brother Thomas is with him. Brother Thomas is a good man, but he can't stop Shaw's men if they come back. Shaw is in custody. His men aren't. They've been 3 steps ahead of us the whole way. Caleb didn't have an answer for that. He stared into the fire, watching the flames shift and dance. "I'm afraid," she said quietly. "Not for me. For the people I left behind. For what might happen if we don't make it back in time. We'll make it." "How do you know?" "Because I've seen what you can do. I've seen what you carry. You've gotten this far. You'll get the rest of the way." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded, just once, and turned back to the fire. They slept in shifts, one watching while the other rested. The night passed without incident. In the morning, they saddled the horses and rode on. The second day brought them to a river, wide and slow-moving. They followed it south, hoping to find a crossing. By midday they came to a ferry, a flat-bottomed boat pulled by a cable. An old man sat on the bank, whittling a piece of wood. "Afternoon," Caleb said. "Afternoon." The old man looked at them. "Crossing?" "Yes." "That'll be $2, Caleb paid. They led the horses onto the ferry, and the old man pulled them across, the cable groaning with the weight. On the far side, they stepped onto a road that ran straight and true toward the mountains in the distance. "There's a town about 15 miles down that road," the old man said. "Kingsley. You might find a telegraph there." They thanked him and rode on. The road was good, and they made better time than they had in days. Kingsley appeared ahead of them as the sun began to sink, a cluster of buildings around a square. They rode into town. The telegraph office was still open. Caleb sent a message to Crane. "Train stopped. Taking alternate route. Will arrive Tucson as soon as possible. Coulter's testimony secured." The clerk read it and nodded. "I'll send it right away." They found a room at a boarding house and slept for the first time in a bed since Washington. In the morning, they bought fresh horses, stronger, faster animals better suited to the road ahead, and set out again. The third day was clear and cold. They rode hard, covering 40 miles by nightfall. The country was changing, the prairie giving way to foothills, and beyond them, the shape of mountains that Caleb recognized. "We're close," he said. "How close?" 3 days, maybe 4. Naya said nothing, but he saw something ease in her shoulders. They made camp in a hollow between 2 hills, sheltered from the wind. The fire felt good, and the coffee tasted like home. On the 4th day they found the burned wagon. It sat on the side of the road, blackened and collapsed, its wheels still smoking. The horses were gone. The bodies had been removed, but the stains on the ground told their own story. Caleb dismounted and walked around the wreckage. There was nothing to identify who had been inside. But on the ground, half buried in ash, he found a piece of metal, a badge. A deputy's badge from Pima County. "This was someone from Tucson," he said. Naya looked at the badge. "Shaw's men? Or federal marshals? It's hard to tell. Either way, it means the fighting has spread." Caleb pocketed the badge. "We need to move faster." They rode through the night, stopping only when the horses were too tired to go on. They slept for 3 hours and rode again at first light. The miles blurred together, marked only by the changing shape of the land and the steady rhythm of hooves. On the 5th day, they crested a ridge and saw Tucson below them, spread out in the valley like a promise. Naya reined in her horse. She looked at the town for a long moment, and Caleb saw her shoulders rise and fall with a deep breath. "We made it," she said. "Almost." They rode down into the valley. The streets were quiet, the early morning light casting long shadows. They went straight to the federal building. Crane was there, standing at the window of his office, a cup of coffee in his hand. He turned when they walked in. "You made it," he said. "We made it. We heard about the train. We thought we'd lost you." "Almost did." Crane looked at them. "Shaw is still in custody, but his people are active. They've been hitting federal couriers, cutting telegraph lines, trying to slow down the investigation. We've lost 2 witnesses in the past week." "Killed?" "One killed, one disappeared. The other is in hiding." Naya stepped forward. "My uncle?" "Safe. Brother Thomas moved him to a mission further south. He's out of reach." Her relief was visible, a softening around her eyes. "And Kisto?" "Still recovering. He's been asking about you." "We need to see Coulter," Caleb said. "We need to get his testimony on the record before Shaw's people can find him." "He's in a safe house, federal protection. We're bringing him before the grand jury tomorrow." "Then we're in time." Crane nodded. "You're in time." That evening, Caleb and Nia sat on the balcony of the federal building, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and red. The air was warm, and the sounds of the city drifted up from below. "It's almost over," Nia said. "Almost. What will you do after?" He thought about the 40 acres and the clean well. He thought about the fence line that still needed mending. "Go home, I suppose, see if the deed holds." "And then?" He looked at her. "And then? I don't know. I've been moving so long I forgot how to stop." "Maybe you don't have to stop. Maybe you just need to find something worth staying for." She said it simply, without expectation. But Caleb heard the weight beneath the words. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the first stars appeared. Somewhere in the city, a door opened and closed, and a woman's voice called out, and a child laughed. Ordinary sounds, in an ordinary evening. But nothing about this evening was ordinary. Tomorrow, they would stand before a grand jury. Tomorrow, they would finish what they had started, and whatever came after, they would face it together. The night deepened. Caleb looked at Nia, and she looked at him. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The fire in the hearth had burned low. The coffee was cold. And the truth, at long last, was finally ready to be told. The morning came cold and sharp, the kind of morning that cuts through a man's coat and reminds him he's still alive. Caleb stood at the window of the boarding house, watching the sun climb over the rooftops of Tucson. Behind him, Nia was dressing, her movements quick and purposeful. She had not said much since they had returned, but the silence between them was not heavy. It was the silence of two people who had said everything that needed saying and were now focused on what came next. They met Crane at the federal building an hour before the grand jury was set to convene. The investigator looked tired, the kind of tired that comes from weeks of chasing a case that kept slipping through his fingers. But there was something else in his face this morning, a settling, a readiness. "Coulter is in the safe house," Crane said. "He's ready to testify. Pruitt is already here. We have the documents, the letters, the witness statements. Everything is in order." "Then why do you look like a man waiting for the other shoe to drop?" Caleb said. Crane allowed himself a thin smile. "Because I've been doing this long enough to know that nothing ever goes exactly as planned." They walked to the courthouse. The grand jury room was on the second floor, a high-ceilinged chamber with dusty windows and a long oak table. The jurors filed in, 12 men and women from the community, ordinary people who had been called to weigh the evidence and decide whether there was enough to proceed to trial. The prosecutor was a federal attorney named Dawson, a lean man with a quiet voice and the eyes of someone who had seen too many guilty men walk free. He laid out the case methodically: the falsified surveys, the murder of Nia's father, the attempted cover-up, the conspiracy that reached from the Territorial Land Office all the way to Washington. Then he called Nia. She walked to the front of the room and was sworn in. She stood straight, her hands at her sides, and she spoke in a clear, steady voice. She told them about her father, about the documents he had kept for 11 years, about the night she had run through the brush and found Caleb on his fence line. She explained the surveys, the markers that had been moved, the 14,000 acres that had been stolen from her people. She did not falter. She did not look away. When she finished, the room was silent. One of the jurors, an older woman with gray hair and a worn face, had tears in her eyes. Caleb was called next. He gave his account plainly, without embellishment. The riders on the ridge, the warrant that did not reach, the journey to Tucson, the ambush on the train, the dead surveyor in the dry wash. He spoke of what he had seen and what he knew, and he let the facts speak for themselves. Coulter was brought in under guard. He looked smaller than he had in his Washington office, diminished by the weight of what he was about to do. He testified about Shaw's payments, about the meetings in Washington, about the letter Shaw had sent him asking him to destroy the original federal survey records. His voice shook at first, but it steadied as he went on. Pruitt testified last. He described how he had moved the markers under Shaw's direction, how he had been told the work was routine, how he had discovered the truth and tried to recant, and how Shaw had threatened him. He did not ask for forgiveness, he simply told the truth. The grand jury deliberated for 4 hours. Caleb and Nia sat on a bench in the corridor, waiting. Crane paced. Dawson stood at the window, looking out at the street. The afternoon sun slanted through the glass, casting long shadows on the floor. "They've been in there a long time," Nia said. "That's good," Caleb said. "Means they're taking it seriously." "Or they're arguing." "That's also good. Means they're paying attention." She looked at him. "You always see the bright side?" "No, but I've learned that worrying doesn't change the outcome." The door opened. The foreman, a heavy-set man with a mustache, stepped out and nodded to Dawson. The prosecutor went inside. A few minutes later he came back out, and his face told the story before he said a word. "Full indictment," he said. "Conspiracy to defraud the United States, falsification of federal records, obstruction of justice, and 3 counts of murder in the deaths of Mr. Nia's father, the surveyor Caleb found in the wash, and 1 additional victim we have yet to identify." Nia closed her eyes. Her hands were trembling, but her voice was steady. "When does the trial start?" 60 days, maybe sooner. We have a strong case." Caleb stood up. "What about Shaw's men, the ones who have been hunting us?" "We have warrants out for 3 of them. The others are being identified." "And Nia's uncle?" "Safe. Brother Thomas sent word this morning." They moved him again, deeper into the mission network. "He's out of reach." Nia let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for weeks. She looked at Caleb, and for the first time since he had met her, he saw something like peace in her eyes. But the peace did not last. They were leaving the courthouse when a federal deputy came running up the street, his horse lathered and blowing. He reined in hard and dismounted before the animal had fully stopped. "Mr. Crane," he said, out of breath, "there's been an attack on the mission where Brother Thomas was holding the uncle." Crane's face went pale. "When?" "Last night. A group of riders hit them at midnight. Brother Thomas held them off, but the uncle was wounded. He's alive, but they need help." Nia was already moving toward the horses. Caleb followed. "Wait," Crane said. "You can't just ride out there. We don't know who attacked them or how many are still in the area." "I don't care," Nia said. "He's my family." "I'm coming with you," Caleb said. Crane looked at them, at the determination in their faces, and knew he could not stop them. "I'll send a federal escort behind you. Take the main road, but stay sharp." They rode out of Tucson within 10 minutes. 2 horses, 2 riders, and a sky that was already beginning to darken with clouds. The mission was 40 miles south, a long ride that would take them into the night. Nia pushed her horse hard, and Caleb stayed beside her, matching her pace. The miles passed in a blur of dust and pounding hooves. They stopped only once, to water the horses at a creek, and then pushed on. The sun set, and the darkness closed in around them. The road became a pale ribbon in the starlight. They reached the mission at midnight. The gate was broken, hanging askew on its hinges. The courtyard was lit by a single lantern, casting long shadows against the adobe walls. Brother Thomas met them at the entrance, his habit stained with blood that was not his own. "He's inside," the brother said. "He's asking for you." Nia dismounted before her horse had stopped and ran inside. Caleb followed. Her uncle lay on a cot in the back room, his chest bandaged, his face pale. But his eyes were open, and when he saw Nia, he reached out his hand. "You came back," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I came back," she said, taking his hand. "I'm not leaving again." He smiled, a thin, tired smile. "Good, because I need to tell you something." "What?" "The men who came last night, they weren't looking for me." He paused, struggling for breath. "They were looking for something else, a letter your father wrote before he died, the one he gave me to keep." Nia's face went still. "I have that letter." "No, that was the letter he wrote for you. The one I have is different. It names the men in Washington who helped Shaw, the ones even Coulter didn't know about." He reached under the mattress and pulled out a folded envelope, yellowed with age. "Your father gave me this the same night he gave me his testimony. He said to keep it hidden until you needed it." Nia took the envelope. Her hands were shaking. "He knew," she said quietly. "He knew everything. He knew that the truth was bigger than one man, bigger than one land commissioner. He wanted it all to come out. Nia opened the envelope and read the letter by the lantern light. Her face changed as she read, the lines of her jaw tightening, her eyes growing dark. Caleb stepped closer. "What does it say?" She looked up. "It names 4 men in the federal land office. The ones who approved the falsified surveys at the national level. One of them is still in office. One of them is a senator," she paused. "And one of them is the man who signed the order that sent Shaw to Arizona in the first place." The weight of it settled over the room like a blanket. "We need to get this to Crane," Caleb said. "We need to get it to Washington," Nia said. "This letter changes everything." Brother Thomas stepped forward. "You can't ride back to Tucson tonight. It's too dangerous. The men who attacked us may still be out there." "Then we leave at dawn," Nia said. She looked at her uncle. "I'll be back, I promise." He nodded, his eyes closing. "I know you will." They bedded down in the mission that night, sleeping in shifts, one eye open. Caleb took the first watch, sitting in the broken gateway, staring out at the dark road. The stars were out, cold and distant, and the wind carried the smell of dust and sage. Sometime before dawn he heard a sound. A horse moving slowly, coming up the road from the south. He rose to his feet and moved into the shadow of the wall, his hand on his rifle. The horse came into view, carrying a single rider. The rider was slumped in the saddle, barely holding on. As the horse reached the gate, the rider slid off and crumpled to the ground. Caleb ran forward. It was a woman, her clothes torn, her face bruised. She looked up at him with desperate eyes. "Please," she whispered, "they're coming. They're coming for the mission. 12 men. They'll be here before sunrise." Caleb lifted her and carried her inside. Brother Thomas came running. Nia appeared in the doorway, her father's new letter in her hand. "Who is she?" Nia said. "I don't know," Caleb said, "but she's carrying the same warning we've been waiting for." He looked at the eastern sky, where the first gray light was beginning to show. "We've got maybe an hour," he said. "We need to move." The woman's name was Sarah Cole, and she had been riding for 2 days straight to reach them. Her horse had foundered 5 miles back, and she had walked the rest of the way, stumbling through the dark with a bullet graze across her ribs and a message burning in her mind. Brother Thomas eased her onto a cot and pressed a clean cloth against her wound while she talked, the words coming in gasps. "Crane sent me," she said. "He found out yesterday afternoon. There's a leak in the federal prosecutor's office. Someone tipped Shaw's people about the letter, about the names your father put down before he died." Nia knelt beside her, the new letter still clutched in her hand. "How did they know about it?" "No one knew except my uncle and Brother Thomas. Crane doesn't know, but Shaw's men have been watching the mission since the attack on your uncle. They saw Brother Thomas move him. They figured if there was something left to find, it would be here." Caleb stood at the window, scanning the dark horizon. "How many, Sarah?" 12, maybe more. They split into 2 groups. One went to the mission where your uncle was first held. When they found it empty, they must have figured he'd been moved here. The other group is heading straight for this mission. They'll be here within the hour." Brother Thomas finished bandaging her wound. "We have maybe 30 minutes. The mission has a hidden passage behind the altar. It leads to a dry wash a 1/4 mile east. From there, you can reach the canyon country." "The horses," Caleb said, "in the stable behind the chapel. If we move now, we can have them saddled and out before the riders arrive." Nia looked at her uncle, who lay on his cot, his eyes open but his strength fading. "He can't ride hard." "I'll carry him," Brother Thomas said. "I know the terrain. I can get him to the canyon and hide him in a cave I know. Shaw's men won't find him there." Caleb shook his head. "You come with us, all of you. We stay together." "There's not enough time to get everyone out," Brother Thomas said. "If I take your uncle and hide, you and Nia and Sarah can draw them away. They'll follow you, not us. It gives your uncle the time he needs to recover." Nia hesitated. Her uncle reached for her hand. "Go," he said, his voice weak but steady. "You have the letter, that's what matters. I'll be fine." She squeezed his hand. "I'll come back for you." "I know you will." They moved fast. Brother Thomas wrapped the uncle in a blanket and lifted him with a grunt of effort. He disappeared through the hidden door behind the altar, a narrow passage that sloped downward into darkness. Nia watched until the darkness swallowed them, then turned and ran for the stable. Caleb had the horses saddled in minutes. Sarah could ride, though her wound made every movement a grimace. They led the horses out the back of the stable and into the open country behind the mission, keeping to the shadows of the low walls. The first riders appeared on the road just as they cleared the last adobe wall. A shout went up, a rifle cracked, the bullet kicking up dust 20 feet to their left. "Ride," Caleb said. They rode. The horses were tired, but they had been rested for the night, and they found their stride across the open ground. Behind them, the riders fanned out, a line of dark shapes against the gray pre-dawn sky. The canyon lay 2 miles ahead. If they could reach it, they could lose the riders in the maze of rock and shadow. If they didn't, they would be run down in the open. Nia rode low, her body pressed against the horse's neck. Sarah clung to the saddle, her face white with pain. Caleb led them toward a gap in the canyon wall, a narrow cut where the rock rose on both sides. They reached it with the riders a quarter-mile behind. The horses' hooves clattered on stone as they plunged into the darkness of the canyon. The walls rose high on either side, blocking out the sky. The only light was the faint gray of dawn reflecting off the rock. Caleb pulled up in a wide spot where 3 smaller canyons branched off. He dismounted and put his ear to the ground. "They're not following," he said. "They stopped?" "They split. 2 went back toward the mission. The others are circling around. They're trying to box us in." Nia swung down from her horse. "We can't stay here." "No, but we can use the canyon to our advantage." He pointed to the smallest of the 3 branches. "That one leads to a dead end. But there's a ledge about halfway up that overlooks the main canyon. If we climb up there, we can see them coming and pick them off if they try to follow." "And our horses?" "We leave them here. They'll be safer in the open than they would be on that ledge. We'll come back for them." Sarah slid off her horse, her hand pressed against her ribs. "I can climb." Caleb looked at her. "You sure? I didn't come all this way to die in a canyon." He nodded. They tied the horses in a sheltered alcove where they would be hidden from the main passage, then began the climb. The ledge was 30 feet up, a narrow shelf of rock that ran along the canyon wall. It was not an easy climb, especially for Sarah, but she made it without complaint, her jaw set against the pain. They settled onto the ledge and waited. The sun rose, casting long shadows across the canyon floor. The heat began to build, radiating off the rocks. An hour passed. 2. "Maybe they gave up," Sarah said. "They didn't give up," Caleb said. "They're waiting." "For what?" "For us to come down." Nia shifted her position, peering over the edge. The canyon was empty, silent except for the wind. "Caleb," she said quietly. He moved to her side. "What?" "There's something on the ridge, across the canyon." He looked. At first he saw nothing. Then a glint of metal, reflecting the sun. A rifle barrel, and behind it, a shape, barely visible against the rock. "He's got a bead on our position," Caleb said. "One shot, and he'll know exactly where we are." "We need to move." "Not yet. If we move, we show him our hand. We need to wait until dark." "That's hours away." "I know." They settled back against the rock, making themselves as small as possible. The sun climbed higher, and the heat became oppressive. Sarah's wound began to bleed again, a slow seep that soaked through her bandage. Nia tore a strip from her shirt and helped her bind it tighter. Sarah's face was pale, but her eyes were clear. "I used to work for Shaw," she said. The words hung in the air. Nia looked at her. "What?" 2 years ago, I was a clerk in his land office. I didn't know what he was doing at first. I thought it was just paperwork, but then I started noticing things. Surveys that didn't match, records that disappeared, names that were crossed off and rewritten. She paused. I started making copies. I kept them in a box under my bed. "Why didn't you go to the authorities?" "Because I was afraid, and because I had a son. He was 7 years old. Shaw found out I was keeping copies. He sent men to my house. They told me if I ever said anything, my son would be taken from me." Her voice cracked. "I burned the copies. I quit my job. I moved away and changed my name. For 2 years I kept quiet. And now? Now my son is with my sister in California. He's safe. And I heard about what you did. about the documents you carried to the courthouse. I thought maybe it was time to stop being afraid." Nia looked at her for a long moment. Then she reached out and touched her hand. "Thank you." The afternoon wore on. The shadow of the canyon wall crept across the floor, bringing relief from the heat. The rifleman on the ridge remained still, a patient predator, waiting for his prey to make a mistake. Caleb studied the canyon walls, mapping every crevice and ledge. "There's a way down on the far side," he said, "a narrow path that leads to the canyon floor about 100 yards east. If we can reach that path without being seen, we can circle around and come up behind him." "That's a long crawl," Nia said. "It's our only move." They waited until the sun was low, casting the canyon into deep shadow. Then they moved. Caleb went first, lowering himself over the edge of the ledge and finding footholds in the rock. Nia followed, guiding Sarah's feet to the holds. They moved slowly, silently, the rough stone scraping against their hands and knees. They reached the narrow path. It was barely wide enough for one person, a thread of rock clinging to the face of the cliff. Caleb led the way, his back pressed against the stone, his feet finding purchase on the crumbling edge. Halfway across, Sarah slipped. Her foot skidded on loose rock. She grabbed for the wall, but her wounded side screamed in protest, and she lost her grip. She fell backward, and for a terrible moment she hung in the air, her arms flailing. Nia caught her wrist. The force of the fall pulled Nia forward, her own feet sliding toward the edge. She dug in, her muscles screaming, her fingers wrapped around Sarah's wrist. "I've got you," she said through clenched teeth. Sarah looked up at her, her eyes wide with terror. "Let go! You'll fall too!" "No." Caleb reached them. He braced himself against the wall and grabbed Sarah's other arm. Together, they pulled her back onto the path. She lay there, shaking, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "You okay?" Caleb said. Sarah nodded, unable to speak. They finished the crossing. The path widened into a flat shelf, and from there they climbed down to the canyon floor. The rifleman's position was above them, but he was watching the other direction, expecting them to break from the ledge. They moved through the shadows, keeping to the cover of the rock. Caleb led them to a narrow crevice that opened onto a dry wash, and from there they made their way back toward the horses. The horses were still there, undisturbed. They watered them from a canteen and saddled up. The sun was setting, painting the canyon walls in shades of red and gold. "Where now?" Sarah said. "Tucson," Caleb said. "We need to get the letter to Crane before Shaw's people can regroup." "They'll be watching the roads." "Then we don't take the roads." They rode through the night, following the dry washes and game trails that wound through the foothills. The stars came out, cold and bright, and the only sound was the steady rhythm of hooves on hard-packed earth. By dawn, they had put 20 miles between themselves and the canyon. They stopped at a line shack, a small structure used by cattlemen during roundups. It was empty, dusty, but the roof was sound, and there was a pump that gave clean water. Sarah collapsed onto a bunk, her face gray with exhaustion. Nia checked her wound and changed the dressing. The bleeding had stopped, but the wound was angry and red. "It needs proper attention," Nia said. "We need to get her to a doctor." "There's a town called Tres Rios about 10 miles east," Caleb said. "They'll have a doctor. And a telegraph office." "Yes." "Then we go there." They rested for 2 hours, then pushed on. Tres Rios was a small settlement, a cluster of buildings around a dusty square. The telegraph office was open, a sleepy clerk behind the counter. Caleb sent a message to Crane. "Attacked at mission. Uncle safe. New evidence. Traveling to Tucson. Send escort to Tres Rios." They waited. The morning passed. Sarah was seen by a doctor who cleaned her wound and gave her laudanum for the pain. She slept in a clean bed for the first time in days. Around noon, the telegraph clattered to life. The clerk read the message and handed it to Caleb. "Escort en route. 3 federal marshals. Arriving sunset. Stay put." They stayed put. The marshals arrived as the sun dipped below the horizon. They were hard-faced men with dust-covered coats and the no-nonsense bearing of men who had been in the saddle a long time. The one in charge introduced himself as Marshal Avery. "We're to escort you to Tucson directly," he said. "Crane's orders. He says you have something that needs to get there safely." I do, Nia said. They rode through the night under escort, the marshals riding ahead and behind, their eyes scanning the darkness. The miles passed. The country changed from foothills to open desert, the saguaro standing sentinel against the starlit sky. They reached Tucson in the early hours of the morning. The streets were quiet, the lamps flickering in the windows of the few buildings that were still awake. They went straight to the federal building, where Crane was waiting. He met them at the door. "You made it." "We made it." "And the letter?" Nia pulled it from inside her coat. It was creased and sweat-stained, but intact. She handed it to Crane. He opened it and read it by the lamplight. His face changed as he read, the lines deepening, his jaw tightening. "This is bigger than we thought," he said. "Much bigger," Nia said. "It names a senator." Crane looked up. "Yes, it does, and it names a man in the current administration." "Can you use it?" Crane folded the letter carefully. "I can use it, but I need to get it to Washington personally. If I send it through any other channel, it could be intercepted." "How long?" 2 weeks, maybe less if I push." Nia looked at him. "Then go." Crane studied her for a moment. "You've done extraordinary work, Nia. Your father would be proud." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Crane left that morning on the first train east, with the letter sealed in a leather pouch and 2 federal marshals as his guard. Caleb and Nia stood on the platform and watched the train disappear into the desert. Then they turned and walked back into the town that had become, for better or worse, the center of everything they had fought for. The days that followed were quiet, the kind of quiet that comes after a storm, when the wind has died and the dust has settled. Nia visited her uncle, who had been moved to a safe house in the eastern part of the territory. He was recovering, slowly. Kisto came through, recovered enough to argue about being left out of the fight. Margaret Aldis returned to Tucson to await the trial, her husband's documents now part of the federal record. And Caleb stood on the porch of the boarding house, looking at the mountains in the distance, and waited. On the 10th day, a telegram arrived from Crane. "Letter delivered. Federal investigation expanded. Arrest warrants issued for senator and deputy assessor. Trial date set. You're all called to testify. I'll be back within the week." Nia read it twice. Then she handed it to Caleb. "It's almost done," she said. "Almost." She looked at the telegram again, then out at the town, the people moving through the streets, the life that went on regardless of the battles being fought in courthouses and Washington offices. "When this is over," she said, "what will you do?" He had thought about that question every day since he had first seen her come out of the brush. The answer had changed with each passing mile, each night spent watching the stars, each moment of silence shared between them. "I'm going to rebuild my fence line," he said, "and then I'm going to see if anyone needs help with theirs." She looked at him. A smile touched her lips, barely there but real. "Maybe I'll help," she said. They stood on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. The sky turned orange and pink, then purple, then dark. Somewhere in the distance a coyote called, and the waiting continued. The days that followed had a strange, suspended quality. The town of Tucson went about its business as if nothing had changed, as if the ground beneath its feet had not shifted in ways that would take years to fully understand. But for those who had been at the center of the storm, the air itself felt different, charged, waiting. Caleb found himself waking before dawn each morning, the habit ingrained from a lifetime of ranch work, and walking the quiet streets while the sky slowly lightened. He passed the federal building, the courthouse, the boarding house where Margaret Aldis was staying. He watched the shadows shorten and the heat build, and he waited. On the 5th day after Crane's telegram, Nia found him on the boarding house porch before the sun was fully up. She sat down beside him without a word, and they watched the light spread across the rooftops. "You sleep?" she asked. "Some. You?" "Not much." She paused. "I keep thinking about the trial, about standing in front of a jury and saying everything out loud, all of it. You've already done that, before the grand jury. That was different. That was behind closed doors. This will be an open court. Shaw will be there. His people will be there. The whole territory will be watching." "That's the point," Caleb said. "The truth needs witnesses." She looked at him. "You sound like my father." "Then I'm in good company." She almost smiled. Almost. On the 7th day, a dust cloud appeared on the road from the east. It grew steadily, resolving into a horse and rider traveling at a pace that spoke of urgency. Caleb recognized the horse before he recognized the man. It was one of the federal marshals who had accompanied Crane. The marshal reined in at the boarding house and swung down, his face grim. "Mr. Dunore, Miss Nia." Crane sent word ahead. "He's 3 hours behind me. The trial date has been moved up." "To when?" Caleb said. "Next Monday. That's 5 days from now." Shaw's people filed a motion to expedite, claiming the delay was prejudicing their client's right to a speedy trial. The judge granted it. "But our case is ready," Nia said. The marshal hesitated. "Mostly. There's been a complication. One of the witnesses for the prosecution has disappeared." "Who?" "A clerk from the Territorial Land Office. The one who was supposed to testify about Shaw's orders to alter the survey records. He went missing 2 days ago." Nia's face hardened. "Shaw's men got to him." "That's what Crane suspects. But there's more. The federal prosecutor received an anonymous letter yesterday warning him to drop the case or face consequences." "He's not going to drop it," Caleb said. "No, but the letter has made the judge nervous. The trial will proceed, but the atmosphere has changed." They waited in silence until Crane arrived. He looked older than he had a week ago, the lines on his face deeper, his eyes shadowed with fatigue. He carried a leather satchel that he set on the table of the boarding house's common room. "Let's go over everything," he said. "We have 5 days, and we're going to need every one of them." The next days were a blur of preparation. They gathered in a small room in the federal building, going over testimony, reviewing documents, anticipating every line of cross-examination. Crane drilled Nia relentlessly, throwing questions at her from every angle, trying to break her story so that it would hold under pressure. She did not break. Margaret Aldis came in to review her husband's documents, her presence steady and calm. Pewitt was there, his face a mask of quiet determination. Sarah Cole, recovered enough to travel, had come from the safe house to offer her own testimony about what she had seen inside Shaw's office. And Coulter, the deputy federal assessor, sat apart from the others, his hands folded in his lap, his gaze distant. He had given his sworn statement, but he would have to testify in open court, and the weight of that was pressing down on him. "How are you holding up?" Caleb asked him one evening. Coulter looked up. "I've spent my entire career behind a desk, Mr. Dunore. I signed papers. I approved surveys. I never once had to look a jury in the eye and admit that I knew what I was signing was false." He paused. "I'm not sure I'm brave enough for that." "Bravery has nothing to do with it," Caleb said. "You've already told the truth in your deposition. All you have to do is tell it again." "It's not the telling that frightens me. It's what happens after." "After?" "When Shaw's people know for certain that I'm the one who turned on them. My family will be protected," Crane said, joining them. "I've arranged for federal protection for your wife and children. They'll be moved to a safe location until the trial is over and Shaw is convicted." Coulter nodded slowly. "And after that?" "After that, you'll have a choice. You can disappear and start a new life, or you can stay and face the consequences of what you did. That choice is yours. But either way, you'll be alive, and your family will be alive. And that's more than Shaw gave the people he killed." Coulter said nothing, but he straightened in his chair, and something in his eyes shifted. The night before the trial, Caleb could not sleep. He sat on the porch of the boarding house, a cup of cold coffee in his hand, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead. The door opened behind him, and Nia stepped out. "Couldn't sleep either," she said. "Come sit." She settled onto the bench beside him. For a long time they said nothing. The night was warm, the air carrying the scent of dust and creosote from the desert beyond the town. "This time tomorrow," she said, "it will all be out in the open. This time tomorrow, Shaw will be in a courtroom, and he won't be able to hide behind his paper anymore. Unless his lawyers find a way to twist it. They might try. But they can't twist the documents. They can't twist the truth." She looked at him. "You really believe that?" "I have to. Otherwise, none of this matters." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "When my father taught me to read surveys, he told me that the truth is like a marker post. It stays where it's put, no matter how much the ground around it shifts. You can move it if you're strong enough, but you'll always know it's been moved, and there will always be a scar in the ground where it used to stand." He was right. He was always right. She paused. "I miss him. I know." They sat in the darkness, two people carrying the weight of a truth that had cost them both more than they had ever expected to pay. And in the silence, they found the strength to face what was coming. The morning of the trial dawned clear and hot. The courthouse was already crowded by the time they arrived, the streets filled with people who had come from miles around to witness the proceedings. The trial of Aldrich Shaw, former Territorial Land Commissioner, had become the talk of the territory, and every seat in the courtroom was taken. Caleb and Nia entered through a side door, escorted by federal marshals. They were led to the front of the courtroom, where they took seats near the prosecution's table. Crane was already there, arranging his papers. Dawson, the federal prosecutor, stood at the podium, reviewing his notes. Across the aisle, Shaw sat at the defense table, dressed in a fine suit, his hands folded before him. He looked calm, composed, as if he were attending a business meeting rather than a trial that would decide the rest of his life. Beside him sat his attorney, Corrigan, the same thin man with wire spectacles who had argued before Judge Weir. The judge entered. Everyone rose. The trial began. The prosecution opened with a statement that laid out the case in clear, simple terms. A conspiracy to defraud the United States government, to steal land from the Apache people, to murder those who stood in the way. Dawson spoke without theatrics, letting the facts speak for themselves. The jury listened, their faces unreadable. The first witnesses were called. A surveyor who had worked with Puett, confirming the original boundary markers. A clerk from the Territorial Land Office who testified to the discrepancies between the federal records and the filed surveys. A woman from the reservation who had seen Shaw's men at the time of Nia's father's death. And then Nia was called. She walked to the witness stand with her head held high. She was sworn in. She sat down, her hands resting in her lap, and looked at the jury. Dawson began his questioning, guiding her through the story she had been carrying for weeks. She spoke clearly, without hesitation. She described her father, his teachings, the documents he had kept hidden. She described the night she had run, the men on the ridge, the journey to Tucson. She did not look at Shaw. Corrigan's cross-examination was brutal. He tried to trip her up, to cast doubt on her memory, to suggest that she had fabricated the story to gain sympathy. He asked the same questions multiple times, hoping to catch her in an inconsistency. He brought up the murder warrant that had been issued against her, implying that she was not a credible witness. Nia answered every question with the same steady voice. She did not get angry. She did not waver. She simply told the truth, over and over, until Corrigan ran out of ways to ask the same thing. When she was dismissed, she walked back to her seat. Caleb watched her pass. Their eyes met, and he nodded once. She had done what she came to do. The next day, the prosecution called Puett. He took the stand and gave his testimony in the same quiet, measured tone he had used in the grand jury. He did not try to excuse his actions. He admitted that he had moved the markers, that he had filed false reports, that he had been complicit in Shaw's scheme. And he described how Shaw had threatened him when he tried to recant. Corrigan's cross-examination was sharp. He painted Puett as a man who had already admitted to lying, and asked the jury why they should believe him now. Puett did not flinch. "Because I told the truth then to protect myself," he said. "And I'm telling the truth now because I don't want to live with the lie anymore." The courtroom was silent. Coulter testified next. He was nervous at first, his voice barely above a whisper. But as he went on, he found his footing. He described the payments Shaw had made, the meetings in Washington, the letter Shaw had sent him asking him to destroy the federal records. He produced a copy of the letter, which was entered into evidence. Corrigan tried to discredit him by pointing out that Coulter had accepted Shaw's money. Coulter looked at the jury and said, "I took the money because I was weak, but I'm here today because I finally found the strength to be honest." The trial moved forward. Sarah Cole testified about her time in Shaw's office, about the records she had seen disappear, about the threats that had driven her into hiding. Margaret Aldis testified about her husband's documents and the night he had been killed. Each witness added a brick to the wall of evidence against Shaw. By the end of the third day, the prosecution had presented a case that seemed unshakable. And then came the fourth day, when everything changed. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation. Shaw was expected to take the stand in his own defense. Instead, Corrigan rose and announced that the defense had a new witness, a man named Elias Barlow. Caleb's head snapped up. Elias Barlow. That was the name of the doctor who had treated Nia's father for the leg infection. The same doctor whose statement had been used to discredit the clerk who falsely claimed Nia's father had stolen documents. But Barlow had not been called by the prosecution. He had not been on any witness list. Corrigan called Barlow to the stand. The doctor was an older man, white-haired, with the gentle hands of someone who had spent a lifetime caring for the sick. He was sworn in, and Corrigan began his questioning. "Dr. Barlow, you treated the late Mr. Nia's father for an infection in his leg, correct?" "That is correct." "Can you describe the severity of that infection?" "The infection was serious but not life-threatening. With proper care and rest, the patient was expected to make a full recovery within a few weeks." "Now, Dr. Barlow, what if I told you that the patient died 6 weeks after you treated him?" "I would be surprised." "Why is that?" "Because the infection had been brought under control at the time of my last visit. The patient was walking without assistance. He was expected to live." The room went very still. Caleb felt his blood run cold. Corrigan continued. "And if the patient died 6 weeks later, would you say that the cause of death could have been natural causes?" "I could not rule it out entirely. But given the circumstances of his recovery, I would consider it unlikely." "Unlikely, but not impossible." "Not impossible." "Thank you, Dr. Barlow. No further questions." The prosecution cross-examined, but Barlow stuck to his testimony. The infection had been manageable. The patient had been walking. He could not say for certain how the patient had died. It was a crack. A small crack, but enough. After Barlow was dismissed, Corrigan called his next witness, a man who claimed to have seen Nia's father arguing with a stranger on the day of his death. A man who said he had heard angry voices, had seen a struggle. A man who suggested that the death might not have been murder at all, but a personal dispute. The prosecution tried to discredit the witness, but the damage was done. The jury had been given an alternative narrative, a narrative that did not involve Shaw. Caleb looked at Nia. She sat rigid, her hands clenched in her lap. Her face was pale, but she did not cry. Later that evening, after the court had adjourned for the day, they gathered in the small room in the federal building. The mood was somber. "He's got a strategy," Crane said. "He knows he can't beat the evidence on the survey fraud, so he's trying to cast doubt on the murder charges. If he can get the jury to believe that your father's death was not a murder, or that it was not directly linked to Shaw, it weakens the entire narrative." "We have the letter," Nia said. "The one my father wrote. It names Shaw. It's circumstantial. A letter written by a man who was dying, naming someone he believed was responsible. The defense will argue that it was written out of fear and suspicion, not fact." "Then we need more," Caleb said. "We need someone who can place Shaw at the scene, or someone who can testify that Shaw ordered the murder." "There is someone," Crane said slowly. "Who?" "Brother Thomas." The name hung in the air. "When the uncle was shot," Crane said, "Brother Thomas was there. He saw the men who did the shooting. He can't identify them by name, but he can describe them. More importantly, he heard one of them say something. He wrote it down. What did he say? He said, "The commissioner wants it done clean. That's enough to link the attack to Shaw." Nia stood up. "Then we need him here. He's 3 days away. The trial will be over by then." "Then we delay." "We can't. The judge won't grant a continuance based on a witness who hasn't been deposed." Nia looked at the window, at the darkening sky. "Then we get him here in 2 days." "It's impossible." "Nothing is impossible." She turned to Caleb. "Can you find him? Can you bring him back in time?" Caleb looked at her. The mission where Brother Thomas had taken the uncle was deep in the southern canyon country. It was a hard ride, even for a man who knew the territory. 2 days there and back would be near impossible. But he looked at her face, and he saw the same determination that had carried her through 8 riders and a murder warrant, and a journey across half a continent. "I'll find him," Caleb said, "And I'll bring him back." The night was black and close, with no moon to guide him. Caleb rode south out of Tucson with a spare horse tied behind him and a canteen full of water that would not last half the journey. He had told Nia he would find Brother Thomas and bring him back, and he had meant it with every fiber of his being. But as the lights of the town faded behind him and the desert opened up in an endless, dark expanse, the weight of what he had promised settled onto his shoulders like a physical thing. The mission where Brother Thomas had taken Nia's uncle was a place called Santa Catalina, a small Franciscan outpost tucked into a fold of the southern mountains. Caleb had never been there, but he had seen it marked on maps in Crane's office, a faint cross at the end of a trail that barely qualified as a road. He had ridden through country like this before, years ago, with his wife, when they had explored the territory together in the first year of their marriage. That memory came back to him now, unbidden, as he guided his horse through the darkness. Her voice pointing out the stars, her hand on his arm, the way the desert had felt like a place of endless possibility instead of endless danger. He pushed the memory aside and focused on the trail. The first few hours passed in a blur of dust and darkness. The horses were sure-footed, but the trail was rough, winding through arroyos and over rocky ridges that slowed their pace. Caleb stopped twice to rest the animals, giving them water from his dwindling supply, and each time he stood in the silence and listened for any sound that did not belong. The desert at night had its own language, the scuttle of a lizard, the distant cry of a coyote, the whisper of wind across sand. He heard nothing that spoke of pursuit, but he did not let his guard down. By dawn, he had covered perhaps 25 miles. The sun rose over the eastern mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the heat began to build almost immediately. He pushed on, stopping only to let the horses drink from a muddy creek he found at the bottom of a wash. The water was brackish, but the animals drank eagerly, and he refilled his canteen as best he could. Around midday, he came to a small settlement, nothing more than a few adobe houses and a corral. He stopped to ask about the trail to Santa Catalina. An old man with a face like cracked leather pointed south toward a gap in the mountains. "Another 15 miles, he said, "but the trail gets rough. You'll have to lead the horses through the last part. The canyon narrows to a ledge." "Obliged," Caleb said. The old man looked at him with curious eyes. "You going to the mission?" "Yes." "Then you'd better hurry. There were riders through here last night asking the same question." Caleb's hand moved instinctively toward his rifle. "How many?" "4. They were heading south, looked like the kind of men who aren't looking for confession." Caleb thanked him and rode on. His horses were tired, but he pushed them harder, the urgency pressing against his chest like a hand. 4 riders, heading the same direction, asking the same question. Shaw's men had not given up. They were hunting Brother Thomas, too. He reached the mouth of the canyon as the afternoon sun began to slant toward the west. The trail narrowed, as the old man had said, winding between walls of red rock that rose steep on either side. He dismounted and led the horses, his rifle in his free hand, his eyes scanning the ledges above. The canyon was silent, too silent. The birds had stopped singing. He moved carefully, his boots finding purchase on the loose stone. The horses followed, their hooves clicking against the rock. The walls pressed in, and the light grew dim, and the air became still and heavy. He heard the shot before he saw the muzzle flash. The bullet struck the rock 3 feet to his left, spraying chips of stone against his face. He dropped the reins and dove behind a boulder, pulling the rifle up as he moved. The second shot came from a different position, higher up the canyon wall. He caught a glimpse of movement, a shadow shifting against the rock, and he fired. The shot echoed through the canyon, a flat crack that bounced off the walls and faded into silence. He waited. No more shots came. "I'm not here to fight you," he called out. "I'm just passing through." A voice answered, rough and cold. "You're not passing anywhere, old man. Turn around and ride back, and we'll let you live." "Can't do that." "Then you'll die in this canyon." Caleb considered his options. He was outnumbered, pinned down, with nowhere to go but forward or back. The horses were spooked, pulling at their reins, their eyes rolling white. He could not hold this position for long. He looked up at the canyon walls, studying the lines of rock and shadow. There was a fissure about 20 feet above him, a narrow crack that might lead to a ledge. If he could reach it, he might be able to flank the shooters. It was a fool's gamble, but it was the only gamble he had. He tied the horses to a scrub bush, making sure the knot would hold, and began to climb. The rock was rough, offering good handholds, but the climb was exposed. He moved as quickly as he could, pressing his body against the stone, trying to make himself as small a target as possible. A shot rang out, and he felt the bullet tug at his sleeve, close enough to leave a burning line across his arm. He did not stop. He reached the fissure and pulled himself into it, his breath coming hard. The crack was narrow, barely wide enough for his shoulders, but it led upward, angling toward the top of the canyon wall. He climbed, his muscles screaming, the rough stone scraping at his hands and knees. He emerged onto a ledge that overlooked the canyon floor. Below him, he could see the 4 riders, dismounted now, spread out among the rocks, their rifles trained on the spot where he had been. They had not seen him climb. He took a breath, he steadied his rifle, and he fired. The first shot took the nearest man in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to the ground. The others reacted instantly, diving for cover, firing blindly up at the ledge. Caleb moved, shifting position before they could fix his location. He fired again, and a second man went down, clutching his leg. The remaining 2 returned fire, pinning him down. He ducked back behind a rock, the bullets chipping stone inches from his head. He could not stay here. He needed to move again. He crawled along the ledge, found a narrow chimney that led down, and descended back to the canyon floor, landing in a cloud of dust. He was behind them now. He could see them, crouched behind their rocks, still firing at the empty ledge. He walked forward, his rifle raised. "That's enough." They turned. For a moment, no one moved. Then the one who seemed to be in charge, a man with a scar across his cheek, slowly lowered his rifle. "You're a hard man to kill," he said. "Not trying to be," Caleb said. "I'm just trying to get to the mission. You and your men are in my way." The man looked at his fallen comrades. "We were paid to stop you." "You've failed." "Yes." The man let his rifle fall to the ground. "I suppose we have." Caleb collected their weapons and sent them walking north, their wounded men leaning on each other, their horses tied in a string behind them. He watched until they were out of sight, then went back to his own horses, untied them, and led them through the rest of the canyon. He reached Santa Catalina as the sun was setting. The mission was small, its adobe walls glowing gold in the last light. A bell tower rose above the courtyard, and a single lamp burned in a window. As Caleb approached, the door opened, and Brother Thomas stepped out, his face weary but alert. "You made it," the brother said. "Barely. Shaw's men were waiting for me in the canyon. They've been watching the mission for 2 days. I've been expecting them to attack, but they held back. I think they were waiting for someone to come looking for me. They found me, but I'm still standing." Brother Thomas smiled, a thin, tired smile. "Come inside. You need rest." "There's no time. The trial is ending. They need you to testify." "I know. I've been ready since the moment I heard the trial started." He paused. "But I have something to tell you first. Something I didn't put in my letter." Caleb followed him inside. They sat in the small chapel, the only light coming from a single candle on the altar. "When the men came to shoot Naya's uncle," Brother Thomas said, "I was hiding in the stable. I saw their faces. I saw the one who gave the orders." He paused. "It was not one of Shaw's usual men. It was a man I recognized. A man who works for the Federal Land Office in Washington." Caleb felt the ground shift beneath him. "You're certain?" "I'm certain. I had met him once, years ago, when he came to the territory to inspect the survey records. His name is Arthur Denning. He is the deputy to the federal assessor." "The same office Coulter worked for?" "The same. Denning is higher up than Coulter. He had more to lose. He came personally to make sure the job was done." Caleb sat back, the weight of this new knowledge settling over him. "That changes everything." "It changes nothing for the trial," Brother Thomas said. "Shaw is still guilty. Denning's involvement does not absolve him. But it means that the conspiracy reaches further than we thought, further than even Crane knows. We need to get you to Tucson." "Then let's go." They rode through the night, Two men on tired horses, pushing toward a deadline that seemed impossibly close. The stars wheeled overhead, and the desert stretched out around them, vast and indifferent. Caleb's arm throbbed where the bullet had grazed him, but he did not slow down. They reached Tucson as the sun was rising on the 6th day. The courthouse was already surrounded by a crowd, the trial about to resume for what would be its final day. Crane met them at the edge of town, his face breaking into relief when he saw Brother Thomas. "You made it," he said. "Barely," Caleb said, "and there's something you need to know." He told Crane about Denning. Crane listened without interrupting, his expression growing grimmer with each word. "Denning," he said when Caleb finished. "I've met him. He is a man with a clean reputation and a lot of powerful friends. If he's involved, it means Shaw's network extends into the highest levels of the land office. It means we can't trust anyone," Brother Thomas said. "It means we need to get this trial over with before Denning has time to react." They entered the courthouse. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with tension. Shaw sat at the defense table, his face composed, his eyes watchful. Corrigan was beside him, shuffling papers. Judge Weir entered, and the room rose. The trial resumed. Dawson called Brother Thomas to the stand. The brother walked forward with the calm of a man who had faced worse than a courtroom full of hostile eyes. He was sworn in. He sat down. Dawson began his questioning. Brother Thomas described the night of the attack on Nia's uncle. He described the men who had come, the shots that had been fired, the words he had heard. "I heard one of them say, 'The commissioner wants it done clean.'" "Did you see the man who said that?" Dawson asked. "Yes, I saw his face. Can you identify him in this courtroom?" Brother Thomas looked at the defense table, at Shaw, at Corrigan. Then he looked past them, at a man sitting in the back row of the gallery, a man who had not been there the day before. "That man," Brother Thomas said, pointing, "the one in the gray coat sitting in the back." Every head in the room turned. The man in the gray coat stood up slowly. He was middle-aged, with a face that had learned to show nothing. He looked at Brother Thomas, then at the judge, then at the door. "Arthur Denning," Crane said, rising from his seat. "Deputy Federal Assessor." Denning did not run. He simply stood there, his hands at his sides, while the federal marshals moved toward him. "Mr. Denning," Judge Weir said, "you will take the stand." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Denning walked to the stand with the measured steps of a man who knew the game was up but refused to show it. He was sworn in. He sat down. Dawson approached him. "Mr. Denning, were you present at the mission of Santa Catalina on the night a man named Nia was shot?" Denning looked at the judge. "I invoke my right to remain silent." The room went still. "Mr. Denning," Judge Weir said, "you are a witness in this trial. The right against self-incrimination does not apply to witnesses in the same manner as it applies to defendants. Answer the question." Denning's jaw tightened. He did not speak. Judge Weir leaned forward. "Mr. Denning, I will give you one more opportunity to answer the question. If you refuse, I will hold you in contempt of court." Denning looked at Shaw. Shaw looked back at him, his face unreadable. "I was at the mission," Denning said finally. His voice was flat, drained of emotion. "And did you give the order to shoot Mr. Nia?" "I gave no such order." "Did you witness anyone giving such an order?" "I witnessed nothing. I was there to observe, nothing more." "Observe what?" "The progress of the situation." Dawson pressed him, but Denning gave nothing more. He admitted to being at the mission, but he denied any involvement in the shooting. He was a skilled witness, trained in the art of saying much while revealing little, but the damage had been done. His presence in the courtroom, connected to the attack, had shredded the defense's narrative. The jury had seen him. They had heard his evasions. The alternative story that Corrigan had tried to build lay in ruins. The prosecution rested. The defense presented no further witnesses. Judge Weir gave his instructions to the jury. They filed out to deliberate. The waiting began. Caleb and Nia sat on a bench in the corridor, the same bench where they had sat during the grand jury. The hours passed. The shadows lengthened. The courthouse grew quiet as the staff went home, leaving only the essential personnel. Nia did not speak. She sat with her hands clasped in her lap, her eyes fixed on the door of the jury room. Caleb sat beside her, saying nothing, his presence a steady anchor in the shifting uncertainty of the moment. The sun set. The corridor grew dim. A marshal brought them coffee, and Caleb drank it without tasting it. At 9 o'clock the door opened. The foreman stepped out. He looked tired, but there was something in his face that Caleb had seen before, in the eyes of men who had carried a heavy weight and finally set it down. "We have a verdict," he said. They filed back into the courtroom. The jury took their seats. Shaw was brought in, his face still composed, but there was a tightness around his eyes that had not been there before. Judge Weir called the court to order. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor." The foreman handed the verdict to the clerk. The clerk read it aloud. "On the charge of conspiracy to defraud the United States, we find the defendant guilty." A murmur swept through the room. "On the charge of falsification of federal records, we find the defendant guilty." The murmur grew. "On the charge of obstruction of justice, we find the defendant guilty." Shaw's face did not change, but his hands, resting on the table, curled into fists. "On the charge of murder in the death of the man known as Nia's father, we find the defendant guilty." The room erupted. Voices rose, people standing, the judge pounding his gavel for order. Nia sat frozen, her hands gripping the edge of the bench, her eyes fixed on the jury. Judge Ware restored order. He thanked the jury and dismissed them. He set a date for sentencing, and then he looked at Shaw. "Aldrich Shaw, you have been found guilty by a jury of your peers on all charges. You will be remanded into federal custody pending sentencing. This court is adjourned." The marshals moved forward to take Shaw away. He stood slowly, straightening his coat. As they led him past the prosecution's table, he paused. He looked at Nia. "You win," he said, "for now." Nia looked back at him. Her voice was steady. "It was never a game." Shaw said nothing. The marshals led him away. The courtroom emptied. Caleb sat beside Nia, the silence settling around them like a blanket. She did not cry. She did not speak. She simply sat, her hands still gripping the bench, her breath slow and even. After a long time, she said, "It's over. It's over," Caleb said. She turned to look at him. "Thank you. You don't have to thank me." "I know, but I'm going to anyway." They stood up. They walked out of the courthouse together, into the cool night air. The stars were out, bright and countless, the same stars that had guided them through canyons and across deserts, and through the darkest hours of a fight that had cost them more than they had ever expected to give. "It's over," Nia said again, as if testing the words. "Yes," Caleb said, "it is." They stood on the courthouse steps, looking up at the sky. The trial was done. The verdict was in. And after all the miles and all the fear and all the moments when hope had seemed like a luxury they could not afford, the truth had finally, at long last, prevailed. But even as the relief washed over them, a small knot remained in Caleb's chest. He thought of the names in the letter, the men who were still in power, the network that stretched far beyond Shaw's reach. The trial had ended one battle, but the war against the forces that had moved those survey markers was far from over. "Rest tonight," he said. "Tomorrow we figure out what comes next." Nia nodded. They walked together through the quiet streets of Tucson, two people who had carried a weight that should have broken them, and who had emerged on the other side, still standing, still together. And for now, that was enough. The night after the verdict, Tucson did not sleep. The news had spread through the town like wildfire, leaping from porch to porch, saloon to saloon, until every lamp in every window burned late into the darkness. Men who had done business with Shaw sat in their parlors and calculated their exposure. Women who had whispered about the trial behind cupped hands now spoke openly in the streets. The air itself felt different, lighter, as if a weight that had pressed down on the territory for years had finally been lifted. Caleb did not sleep either. He sat on the boarding house porch, watching the stars wheel overhead, and let the silence settle around him like a familiar blanket. The trial was over. Shaw was in a federal cell, waiting for sentencing that would likely keep him in prison for the rest of his life. Denning had been arrested within an hour of the verdict, charged with conspiracy and attempted murder. The federal investigation was expanding, reaching into offices in Washington that had thought themselves untouchable. The truth had done what the truth always does when given enough time and enough people willing to carry it. It had prevailed. But the victory felt strange, hollow in some ways he could not quite name. He had spent so many years alone on his 40 acres, telling himself that silence was peace, that solitude was strength. And now, sitting here in a town that was not his home, with a woman who had changed everything he thought he knew about himself, he wondered what he would do when the silence returned. The door opened behind him. Nia stepped out, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her hair loose around her face. She looked younger in the moonlight, the hard edges of the past weeks softened by something that might have been relief. "You're still awake," she said. "So are you." She sat down beside him, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her. They sat in silence for a long moment, watching the stars. "My father used to say that the night sky was the same no matter where you were," she said. "That no matter how far you traveled, the stars would always be there to guide you home." Was he right? She thought about it. "I think he was. I've traveled a long way, and I'm still finding my way home." "You are home," Caleb said, "or you will be when you're ready." She looked at him. "And you? Will you go back to your 40 acres? "I thought about it, sitting here tonight. I thought about the fence line I was fixing when you came out of the brush. I thought about the well that still runs clean, and the horse that needs exercising, and the roof that probably needs patching by now." He paused. "And I thought about how quiet it will be. Is that a bad thing?" "It was before. I don't know if it is anymore." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Come with me to the reservation tomorrow. There's something I want to show you." He looked at her. Her face was serious, but there was a light in her eyes that he had not seen before. Not the fire of determination that had carried her through the trial, but something softer, something like hope. "All right," he said, "I'll come." The next morning they rode out of Tucson together. The sun was warm, the sky clear, and the road ahead was open and empty. They took the southern route, through the canyon country where they had hidden from Shaw's men, past the mission where Brother Thomas had sheltered Nia's uncle, past the dry wash where the surveyor's body had lain. The country looked different now, stripped of the fear that had colored it before. The red rock glowed in the morning light, and the sage smelled clean and good. They reached the reservation in the afternoon. The settlement was quiet, the normal rhythms of daily life moving forward as they had for generations. Children played in the dust, women worked at their tasks, men sat in the shade and talked. When Nia rode in, they looked up, and their faces changed. Not with surprise, but with recognition. Word had traveled ahead of them. Sia came out to meet them, her face breaking into a smile that seemed to light up the whole yard. She took Nia's hands and held them, speaking rapidly in Apache. Nia answered, and the two women embraced, holding each other for a long moment. Nia turned to Caleb. "My uncle is asking for you." He followed her into the house. The uncle was sitting up in bed, propped against pillows, his color better than it had been when Caleb had last seen him. His eyes were clear, and he held out his hand. "Sit," the uncle said. "I have something to say to you." Caleb sat. The uncle looked at him for a long moment, his gaze steady and searching. "You saved my niece's life," he said. "You carried her across the territory. You stood between her and the men who wanted to kill her. You brought the truth to light." He paused. "I cannot repay that debt, but I can acknowledge it." "You don't owe me anything," Caleb said. "I owe you everything, and so does this community. The land that was stolen, it will be returned. The families who were displaced will come home. That would not have happened without you. I was just a man who happened to be fixing a fence line," the uncle smiled. "That is how the best things start. A man fixing a fence line, a woman running through the brush, a moment of choice that changes everything." He reached under his pillow and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. "I want you to have this." Caleb unwrapped it. It was a stone, smooth and dark, carved with a symbol he did not recognize. "It is a marker stone," the uncle said. "From the boundary of our land, the one that was moved. I kept it all these years, waiting for the day when the truth would be restored. Now that day has come." He looked at Caleb. "I want you to keep it. As a reminder that boundaries can be moved, but they can also be set right. Caleb held the stone in his hand, feeling its weight and smoothness. "I'll keep it," he said, "and I'll remember." They stayed at the reservation for 3 days. Caleb helped mend a corral fence, rode out with the young men to check on the cattle, sat in the evening around a fire, and listened to stories he could only partially understand but felt in his bones. The community accepted him with the quiet hospitality of people who had learned to judge others by their actions rather than their words. He was the man who had helped Nia. That was enough. On the 3rd evening, Nia found him sitting alone on a rise overlooking the settlement. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. She sat down beside him. "I've been thinking," she said. "About what?" "About what comes next. The trial is over. The land is being returned. My uncle is healing. Kisto is getting stronger every day." She paused. "And I don't know what to do with myself." "You could stay here," Caleb said. "This is your home." "It was my home, but it's not the same as it was when my father was alive. Everything has changed. People change. Places change. That doesn't mean you don't belong here." She looked at him. "And what about you? Will you go back to your 40 acres? "I will," he said. "But I've been thinking about something else, too." "What?" 40 acres is a lot for one man. And the fence line runs a long way. He looked at her. "I could use some help." She was quiet for a long moment. The sun dipped lower, the colors deepening. "Are you asking me to come with you?" "I'm asking you to think about it. There's a well that runs clean, and a horse that needs riding, and a roof that probably needs patching." He paused. "And there's a lot of quiet that I don't think I want to fill alone anymore." She looked at him, and in her eyes he saw the same light he had seen on the boarding house porch, the same hope. "I'll think about it," she said. They watched the sunset together, the sky turning from gold to purple to dark. The first stars appeared, faint at first, then brighter, scattered across the vast dome of the heavens. The night was warm, and the air smelled of dust and sage, and for a moment everything was exactly as it should be. The next morning Caleb rode back to his 40 acres. He took the northern route, through country he knew, past landmarks that had been familiar to him for years. The journey took 2 days, and he spent them thinking about what he would find when he arrived. The ranch was exactly as he had left it. The fence line still needed mending. The well still ran clean. The roof still needed patching. Copper was glad to see him, nuzzling his hand with a warm breath. The house was dusty, the cold hearth waiting for a fire. He spent the first day cleaning, fixing, settling back into the rhythms of solitary life. The work was good. It kept his hands busy and his mind quiet. But when evening came and he sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, the silence pressed in around him in a way it never had before. He looked at the stone the uncle had given him, sitting on the table beside his chair. He picked it up, felt its weight, ran his thumb across the carved symbol. A marker stone from a boundary that had been moved and set right. On the 3rd day, he saw the dust on the horizon. He stood on the porch, watching it approach. A single horse, moving at a steady pace. As it drew closer, he recognized the rider, and his heart did something he had not expected. Nia reined in at the gate. She looked at him, and a smile touched her lips. "That roof still need patching?" she said. "It does." "And that well still running clean?" "It is." She dismounted and led her horse through the gate. "Then I suppose you could use the help." He stepped off the porch and walked toward her. They met in the middle of the yard, the dust settling around them, the afternoon sun warm on their faces. "Welcome home," he said. She looked at the house, at the corral, at the wide sky stretching out above them. "It's not home yet," she said. "But it could be," he nodded. "It could be." They stood together in the yard, two people who had traveled a long and difficult road, who had carried a truth that had tried to break them, and who had emerged on the other side with something worth holding on to. The fence line stretched out along the boundary of the land, marking the edge of what was his and what was not. Boundaries could be moved, as the uncle had said, but they could also be set right. And standing there, with Nia beside him, Caleb felt something he had not felt in years, the certainty that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The frontier stretched out around them, wild and vast and full of possibility. The wind carried the scent of sage and dust and the promise of rain somewhere beyond the mountains. The sun continued its slow arc across the sky, indifferent to the small dramas unfolding below, but somehow warmer than it had been before. Nia looked at him. "What do we do first?" He thought about the fence line, the roof, the well. He thought about the long days ahead and the even longer nights. He thought about the quiet that had once felt like a burden and now felt like a gift. "We start," he said, "one thing at a time." She nodded, and together they walked toward the house. The weeks that followed were a slow unfolding of ordinary days. They rebuilt the fence line together, Nia learning the rhythm of the work, Caleb teaching her the small tricks that made the job easier. They patched the roof, the nails ringing out across the yard in a steady rhythm. They planted a small garden, the seeds going into the ground with the careful hope of people who understood that some things took time. Kisto came to visit, recovered enough to ride and argue with equal enthusiasm. He looked at the ranch with a critical eye and pronounced it acceptable, then spent the afternoon helping Caleb reinforce the corral. Brother Thomas stopped by on his way south, bringing news of the reservation. The land was being formally restored. The families were returning. The healing had begun. Margaret Aldous had returned to Tucson, where she had taken a position at the federal land office, determined to ensure that no other surveyor's findings disappeared into a corrupt file. Pruitt had left the territory, seeking a new start somewhere the past could not find him. Coulter was cooperating with the federal investigation, his testimony helping to build cases against the men still in power in Washington. And one evening, a letter arrived, bearing the official seal of the federal government. It was from Crane, reporting that Arthur Denning had been convicted on charges of conspiracy and attempted murder, and that the senator whose name had been in Nia's father's letter had resigned his seat rather than face impeachment. The truth had traveled a long way. It had found its mark. Caleb and Nia sat on the porch that evening, the letter spread between them, the last light of the sun fading from the sky. "It's done," Nia said. "All of it. It's done." She looked at the letter, then out at the land stretching before them. "My father would have wanted to see this." "He does see it," Caleb said, in a way. She was quiet for a moment. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out the letter her father had written, the one she had carried through the desert and across the continent. She unfolded it and read it one last time by the fading light. Then she folded it carefully, stood up, and walked to the edge of the porch. She looked at the marker stone that Caleb had placed on the gatepost, the one her uncle had given him. She tucked the letter into the fence wire, where the wind could take it if it wanted. "He's home," she said. Caleb came and stood beside her. "Yes, he is." They stood there, watching the stars come out. The fence line ran straight and true, marking the boundary of the land that was theirs now, in every way that mattered. The well ran clean, the roof was sound, the garden was beginning to grow. And in the quiet of the evening, with the person who had become his family standing beside him, Caleb Dunore felt something he had not felt in a very long time: peace. The frontier was still wild. There would be other fights, other storms, other troubles waiting over the horizon. But that was for another day. Tonight the stars were bright, the air was warm, and the two people standing on the porch had found something worth more than any deed or document. They had found each other. The fire burned low in the hearth behind them, casting a warm glow through the window. The horses stamped softly in the corral. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, and the land answered with silence. Caleb looked at Nia. She looked at him. And in the quiet of that evening, on the porch of a ranch that had once been empty and now was full, they began the long, slow work of building a life together. This is Clint Dawson, and you've been listening to Frontier Heart Audio. Until next time, keep your heart open and your trails safe.